Good morning, dear colleagues.
Buenos días.
I hope you all enjoyed the dinner last night in Estonia Concert Hall. And you saw that walking on a rope is not difficult at all, so try it at home. We will continue with our conference, and we have 2 sessions ahead. First one will focus on collecting taxes in a more effective way. The first session sets out a series of examples of how national tax authorities are administrating taxes in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. Efficient tax collection is a major challenge for tax administrations and has a major impact on budget revenues. Moreover, the use of technologies and rise of economic systems are causing states to review the tax implications and deployment of technologies. In Estonia, we use digital solutions in everything we do. For example, 95% of people submit personal tax declarations online, and it takes around 5 minutes. Also, the policy of Estonia is, instead of raising taxes, trying to make some changes in the system, how to improve the tax collection. And for example, we've adopted also employees register, which really worked well, and the first keynote speaker, Mr. Yegorov, will talk about it more specifically. And the second thing that Estonia adopted 2 or 3 years ago was VAT declaration new formula, which really helped to raise the revenues in terms of VAT tax paying. So once again, our idea is not to raise taxes, but to collect them in a more effective way. Now let me introduce you our distinguished speakers for this session. First speaker is Mr. Dmitry Yegorov from the Estonian Ministry of Finance. Second speaker is from European Commission, Ms. Maria Teresa Fabregas. Both speakers will have around 15 minutes, and then we have time for a debate. And after the keynote speeches, I will give the word to my co-chair, Mr. Philippe Dallier from the French Senate. And colleagues, to remind you, you can sign up for the debate already. You can request the floor electronically from the seat reserved for you. To register your request, please press the head button on your conference unit, and please follow the instructions on your desk. You can take the floor after the presentations, and we will address you when it's your turn. So, I would like to warmly welcome our first speaker for this session, Mr. Dmitry Yegorov, the Deputy Secretary General for Tax and Custom Policy at the Estonian Ministry of Finance. Prior to the ministry, Dmitry Yegorov worked for the Tax and Customs Board for almost 10 years. Mr. Yegorov, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Remo. In the style of the reply that once a former prime minister gave on a TV show in the United States, I would like to reflect a little bit on the percentage of tax returns submitted to the tax administration electronically. So when Remo said that it's 95% of people who submit them electronically and it takes 5 minutes, well, that's not true. It's 96% and it takes 2 minutes, but the fact still remains. So let's talk about effective and efficient tax administration. First and foremost, there are certain prerequisites for successful tax administration, which also means that tax policy has to be an integral part of successful tax administration. It is absolutely very difficult to administer in a simple way complex legislation. So the legislation must also allow for easy administration of taxes. Also, it is always helpful to have process-based management and a service-oriented approach in tax administration. Of all the different administrations, tax administration is one of the easiest to be run as business just because it deals with money. Many other administrations are not dealing with money, and there are questions on how to assess their efficiency. But in a well-mapped process, everyone in the administration can see their place, and it is extremely important for people to know where their input comes from and where their output goes to. Audit and criminal investigation, if they are under a tax administration, especially for criminal investigation, this is also a service to society, to complying businesses in a country. And what is extremely important is that segmentation is done for customers, i.e. taxpayers, and this has to be based on solid data intelligence. Less paper, more IT, this is inevitable. This is true in many countries, coming to the rest of the countries. The economists say that taxes are deadweight. Well, they may be deadweight to economists, but they provide necessary finances for public goods, but definitely costly administration, unnecessary costly administration is surely just that. So a little bit of history. Tax Board and Customs Board were merged in Estonia in 2004. Prior to that, prior to joining the European Union, both administrations employed about 3,500 people. Now, approximately 1,500 people are employed in the joint administration. What was important that first IT of both administrations was merged. So before Tax Board and Customs Board were separate, they already had one joint IT. And joining IT is usually one of the most difficult processes in merging organizations. For service and control, there was full merger in inverted commas, which means that there was no distinction of tax department and customs department. Both service department and the control department were dealing with both tax and customs issues. A service-oriented approach was adopted immediately. So it's not tax administration collecting the taxes. It's tax administration facilitating for the taxpayers paying of taxes. So they see the role as helpers for those who want to comply. For e-solutions, an important point is that the tax administration did not wait for integral solutions, IT solutions for the whole country, and this is why electronic services for the tax administration came before we had an ID card with an electronic chip given as a digital signature. So it's never a stopper if you don't have the right infrastructure for the whole country yet. You can be the first one. For service, the important words are that or electronic submission is something that saves time to do business. And business should be focused on business, not on paying taxes. We do pre-filling of tax returns. We have done this for quite some time. Again, this saves time both to business and to taxpayers. We have enabled faster repayment of income tax if the tax return is electronic, and this was one of the incentives for people to want to submit tax return electronically. It was done within 5 working days. And we had people lining up in the tax administration office to use the customer computer, and we had lines for people waiting there 1 hour, 2 hours, because they didn't know how to do that, but they had specialists there to explain and to help. And then we had people sitting at the desk, service desk, to submit a tax return on paper, and there was no line there, because everybody wanted to get their money within 5 working days. So these are kind of incentives you can use. There is an obligation for electronic submission of returns, tax returns for businesses if there are more than 5 entries on the tax return. It's always only electronic for public institutions, whether at central level or local level. So there's enough computers for everyone. They have to use that. And we also encourage shared economy platforms to enable submission of tax data from their users to the tax administration. We have Uber cooperating with Estonia. So if you're a driver who's driving Uber in Estonia, you have an ability to tick a box, and then your income data will be submitted to the tax return, to your tax return, to be pre-filled. More than 80% of information from Uber drivers on their taxes comes from this option, so it's fairly popular. The E percentage for natural persons rose from 3% in 1999 to 96% for 2016. For the past 10 years, it has been above 90% in all years. As I said, data intelligence is very important, so checks and risks analysis are automatic. So it allows us to repay income tax within 5 days, and also VAT repayment to business customers, for most of them, goes about 2 or 3 days because of these automatic checks. Here you have a slide showing the evolution of service. So as long ago as 2000, we had it on paper, and 99 was the first one to be able to submit electronically. Then we switched to e-service and started pre-filling in 2004. We ended up with 5 clicks declaration in 2007. We introduced smartphone tax return in 2013. And since 2015, it's a one-click declaration. So you open and you agree that the data is correct, or otherwise you would have to alter the data. And the next step will be no touch. So we wouldn't even want that one click. So you open the declaration, you see everything is correct, and then you don't have to do anything. For control, as I said again, and I will never be tired of repeating this, solid data intelligence is the basis. So access to databases is extremely important for tax administration, but data protection also is very important. This allows the tax administration to know more than it can handle, because this will give them the ability to prioritize largest fraud. And as tax administration is an expense, it's a cost. It's better to see them bringing in more money per every euro they spend on their costs. There are no blind or random audits, because this is a waste of resources when you have information and you can go exactly where you know where risks are. We use information letters to save on resources. So the rule of the thirds say that when we know some risk and we send these letters to taxpayers, 1/3 reacts and changes their tax returns to the better. 1/3 is able to explain why the data is different, and the last 1/3 does not react, and this is the one that will be audited. So this is how you basically cover 3 times more of non-compliant taxpayers, or potentially non-compliant taxpayers, with the resource that you have. And by the way, aggregate data on most taxes paid for businesses is public in Estonia. It is aggregate. It does not disclose a lot of business secrecy, but anyways, it helps to see whether your competitors pay enough taxes or not. So the 2 things that Remo mentioned in his introduction are the register of employees and the so-called VAT inf, or the VAT summary declaration, that allows us to see much more than what we used to see. So there is obligatory registration of employees prior to starting work. Even if the information systems are not online, you have to send in an SMS, and that means that the tax administration does not see anymore such a case when they come to, for example, a construction site, and they are being told that these employees are there for the first day. So this cannot be true any longer. And what we witnessed is 4% registered employees number in 6 months after the introduction of this register of employees. The detailed tax return on VAT means that all transactions with parties over 1,000 euros per month must be reported to the tax administration separately from the buyer and from the seller side, so that cross-checks can be done. And what we saw is a 5% VAT revenue increase in 1 year without raising taxes. This is a lot of money, and this allowed us to see a decreased VAT gap. So here on this slide, You see in blue the share of unregistered employees after the introduction of employee register for various sectors. And the red one was the immediate effect, and the green lines above is what we estimated to be the share of unregistered employees prior to the register. And here on this slide, if you look at the two last columns, 2014, 2015, is the effect of the VAT detailed report to the tax administration. So right now we're running at about 5% VAT gap, meaning about 5% of VAT is not being collected of the potential VAT. Something that we will be introducing soon is giving back the data to the taxpayers and allowing it to share this. What you see on the left slide is the risk assessment of every taxpayer based on categories, whether this is the risk of not showing enough profits, whether it's risk of VAT, or whether it's a risk of unregistered labor. And this will show the taxpayer what tax administration knows about him or her, and allow the taxpayer to correct the behavior to see all fives or the top scores on this report. But not only that, the business will be able to share, download and share this report with its partners. And what we think is going to happen in future is that unless your partner is willing to show you their risk report, you will not be dealing with that partner from a certain point in time. And we also want to give the statistics. So we do have the data, and we will be able to show you, if you're in business of construction, how are you doing compared to your competitors? What are their averages? What are their average salaries? What are their average turnovers in that respective region, in that particular line of business? And this is a valuable information in terms of business analytics that most of the SMEs just don't have the time to perform. We will be able to do that for them. A few words about revenue management. Debt must be collected while it's fresh. We consider that debt over 6 months is old debt, and most likely it's not going to be collected. So it is very important that debt management is swift and quick in action. There is a possibility to apply for installment in Estonia, and the automatic decision based on risk will be issued without officials even looking at this application. But of course, this can only be done once, and then if you don't stick to this plan, then officials will, of course, take care of that. But it is also possible to ask for installment schedule even before the debt occurs. So if you already know that you will not be able to pay the tax in future, you are able to ask for the installment in advance. We say that fair taxes, fair administration of taxes is when honest business has the right to a good night's sleep, meaning that tax administration has to take care that non-compliance is dealt with, and including seizure in case of tax debts, and removing the unfair competition. We are completely open about all tax debts. All tax debts are published. And we also closely monitor transfer of business and leaving empty shells, because this is a huge problem when debts are left into the old legal person and all the activities are taken to a new legal person. So the best way to fight fraud for us is to cooperate with business. It's like a best way to fight a disease, the triangle rule. If the doctor and the patient are together against the disease, then the disease will be taken out. But if the patient is with the disease, then doctors are helpless. The same case is here. Cooperation and trust with professional organizations is extremely important. They know best how their line of business works, and they are able to explain that to the tax administration. And also when the tax administration leaves the room, they're able to talk openly and honestly to the members of their association. They have an eye for when a partner speaks truth and a partner is not speaking truth, to put it more mildly than it is written here on this slide. So peer pressure actually does help boost tax morale. A word of advice. As I said before, tax policy is a crucial element, and indeed, meaningful policy is crucial for successful tax administration. It is very difficult to administer in a simple way a complex tax policy. In Estonia, if social tax is not paid on salaries, then employee has no social security, and so employees avoid unregistered labor. They're not motivated to take up unregistered labor. Company car usage will be cheaper on a monthly basis from next year, but linked to the right of use, avoiding complex accounting of actual use of cars. There will be a business bank account for small entrepreneurs up to 25,000 euro, where banks will hold 20% on revenue and transfer to the tax administration to cover for all taxes. So no accounting, no contracts, no checks, no receipts, but also, unfortunately, no cost deduction. So this is a good balance for the system. And of course, taxpayers' willingness to comply depends on them seeing politicians spending their money. This is also a crucial element for tax moral. 2 last slides. Where to go next? For the administration, in the future, we don't want any tax returns. Because what is a tax return? It's the same tax data that the taxpayer already has in their computer or in their books, and we don't want a return. We don't want a return, we want the tax data. So we suggest to link the systems of tax administration with the accounting systems of the taxpayer, and for that we cooperate with 12 different producers of accounting software. And in the future, those who have this software, which basically covers 80 to 90% of the market, these businesses do not have to submit tax returns at all. We believe that blockchain for administering VAT and excise taxes is the future. You know, blockchain being one chain of data, decentralized, based on consensus, it cannot be changed retrospectively without knowing that something has been changed in this set of data. VAT and excise transactions can have their so-called fingerprint. That means that we are able to say that the tax return submitted to us or the data that we have has not changed in the past, but it's also secure because just as on the border you're not able to construct a person by knowing his fingerprint, you only have the ability to say that this person is the right person. And of course, in terms of carousel and other types of fraud, the tax people will get immediate attention to, immediate signal to where the fraud is occurring, and not like it is now. For example, in Estonia, the VAT return must be submitted on the 20th of the month following the tax period. So on the 20th date of the month, we know exactly where fraud happened, who it happened between, and how much money we lost. So that needs to be dealt with, and we need to know not the next month, but the next day. In terms of policy, digital is, of course, on the rise. But the biggest question, we all agree that value creation place is where tax has to be paid, but we haven't agreed what value creation is. So where is value created is actually one of the largest questions for corporate income tax. We are so fixed on physical locations and physical assets. You know, permanent establishment rules depend on all things physical to say where tax has to be paid. But digital business does not need physical assets to the degree that normal business needs it. And digital business certainly does not care for physical locations. So the rules do not work any longer. The rules that come from the middle of 19th century old-time Prussia on permanent establishments. Of course, in 19th century, there was no digital economy. So it's about last time we need to change those rules. And also collaborative economy and digital nomads. What is the future of working? We see people working 1 month in one country and moving 12 times per year. Where are they working? Where is their social security? Are they going to pay taxes to where the public services are best? These are the questions that are asked already and will be asked even more in future. There are certain anonymity concerns of blockchains, so they're not regulated by the government, and we should decide whether we trust them and whether there is enough precautionary mechanisms to allow us to trust them. What is the role of collaborative economy platforms? Should they allow for anonymity, or should they provide the information, maybe not on a voluntary basis, but on a compulsory basis to tax administrations? Is there an end to consumerism due to sharing? So if a true sharing economy allows one neighbor to buy a drill, another neighbor to buy a lawn mower, and all of them to share between them, does that mean that purchase of services will decrease in the future? These are very important questions that we will be facing quite soon. That would be the end of my presentation. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dmitry.
Muchas gracias, Dimitri.
Find the presentation in our webpage if you want to take a look at it.
También podrán encontrar la presentación en nuestra página web si quieren verla mayor.
And it's parleu2017.de is the address, so you will find Dmitri's presentation from there. Now I'm delighted to give a floor to Ms. Maria Teresa Fabregas. Ms. Fabregas is the Director for Indirect Taxation and Tax Administration at the European Commission. And previously, she has served several positions in the Commission as well. So the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. So it's a pleasure for us, the European Commission, to be here to talk about efficient tax collection, which is a common challenge for all of us, in particular in the global digital environment in which we are living now. So in the European Union, EU member states, taxes are the main revenue for financing public expenditures and structural reform. However, tax system may be complex and burdensome, resulting in high compliance costs for taxpayers or even non-compliance. Moreover, for tax administrations, the costs for collecting taxes are high. The cost of running most EU member states' tax administrations may be between 50 cents and 1.5 euro for every 100 euro collected. So in particular, in times of financial constraints, staff cuts, expensive IT investments, these administrative costs put a huge pressure on tax administrations. The European Commission recognizes the importance of tax collection, and it is a key priority for the European Commission to create a framework in order to provide for a deeper, fairer internal market where everybody, citizens and business, should pay its fair share of taxes. In the State of the Union speech of President Juncker, he mentioned that Europe's economy is recovering and that it is time to catch the wind on our sails. However, this economic revival does not automatically imply that all taxpayers pay their due taxes. For instance, if we look at the VAT Gap study in the European Union that was published at the end of September, there is still a major gap of 151 billion euros between the overall difference between the expected VAT revenue and the amount actually collected by each member state. Also, the Panama Papers recently published a report of the UK House of Commons on VAT fraud in the field of e-commerce, about 1 billion to 1.5 billion pounds, raised concerns about tax collection and calls for action from both member states and also on the side of the European Commission to improve this tax collection. So we consider that we should look at two fronts. The first important aspects to discuss concerns the tax system as such, the legal framework, its fairness and transparency. That is about the tax legislation, and it's really important to modernize and simplify tax rules that are at the core of our initiatives in the Commission in order to make it easier for citizens and business to understand where and what taxes they have to pay and to comply with. Examples of this relate, for instance, in the VAT area to the current Commission proposal on e-commerce, on facilitating cross-border trade for e-commerce in the field of VAT, which is going to the ECOFIN next week. And we thank the Estonian presidency for all the efforts in order to try to find the necessary consensus to reach the unanimity on this file. We also, from the Commission side, have presented at the beginning of October the first steps of what we call the definitive regime on the VAT system in order to create a single European VAT area and eliminating the risk of the carousel fraud or missing trader that exists today. And at the end of November, the European Commission will be presenting more rules in order to simplify the VAT systems for SMEs and also to modernize the VAT rates and to reinforce the instruments that tax authorities have in terms of administrative cooperation. Also important to highlight that the European Commission is working on a digital tax, which brings us into what Mr. Gegorov just mentioned about the challenges of this old-fashioned legislation that needs to be updated. So the second pillar, the second aspect for efficient tax collection relates to the system of collecting taxes itself. It is about procedures and processes on how efficient and effective a tax administration functions. Mr. Gegorov has mentioned how Estonia is dealing with the issues. So to collect tax revenues in an efficient and effective way, tax authorities aim at achieving as much as possible that taxpayers voluntarily comply with tax obligations. For that reason, a reliable, effective, and efficient operating tax administration is needed. Tackling tax abuse can create the space needed to lower the tax burden for honest taxpayers and contribute to establishing trust in tax authorities and increase voluntary compliance. Nowadays, digitalization, globalization, new business models such as e-commerce and the collaborative economies, tax fraud and avoidance, and resource constraints urge tax administrations to review their practices and find additional or alternative ways to collect taxes. Tax administrations are aware of these challenges and have taken action. Over the past year, many tax administrations, for instance, reformed their organizational structure. So they changed from a tax type-based administration towards a tax administration organized around types of taxpayer, being large companies, SMEs, private persons, or functions, registration, filing, payment, that is putting the taxpayer in the center of the tax administration activities. They also offer services to taxpayers, as we have seen in Estonia, to assist them in fulfilling their tax obligations, being registration, filing of tax returns, payment, and accounting, by providing information on websites, online registrations, pre-filled tax returns, electronic filing, and payment. In addition, there is an increasing use of intelligent technology and risk management. Data mining and risk analysis are playing a growing part in compliance and audit initiatives and offer tax administrations better decision-making when it comes to allocation of resources. So striking the right balance between voluntary compliance and enforcement in tax collection is a major challenge. Therefore, topics such as data processing and analyzing, compliance approaches, building trust, fight against tax fraud, human budget resources, and administrative capacity building are priorities in most of tax administrations. So from the Commission side, we consider that it's really important to enhance the efficiency of tax collection as a priority. In the context of the European semester, the Commission puts emphasis on the efficiency of tax collection. In particular, it looks at the role of tax administrations in ensuring tax compliance and in creating the right business environment to boost investment. To stimulate investment, innovation, and entrepreneurial initiative, it is important to develop the right business environment for investment in the EU. This includes cutting compliance costs, in particular by increasing efforts to digitalize tax administration, which can then facilitate tax compliance, and equip the system to new realities, for instance, by making tax administration more customer-centric. Initiatives in the framework of the digital single market, such as e-government, go into this direction. To combat tax fraud, evasion, and avoidance, it is important also to increase cooperation between countries and improving administrative capacity. For example, with joint audits, sharing of information between countries. At the same time, promoting trust, transparency, and a culture of tax compliance also matters. This can rely, for example, on communication and education campaigns to strengthen taxpayers' morale and show to taxpayers the value delivered through tax revenues. Under the Fiscalis program managed by the European Commission, we are doing some relevant activities in this regard together with the tax administrations. In order to identify potential challenges faced by member states, we use indicators such as the time needed to comply with tax obligations, the offer of digital services, and those are available in the annual report called Tax Policies in the EU Survey, which will be published in mid-November. Another assessment of efficient tax collection is done in particular on the VAT area in the framework of the VAT own resources of the European Union. The so-called Article 12 report evaluates the performance of tax administrations in the core functions of VAT administration, being registration of taxpayers, filing and paying VAT returns, and VAT controls. The 2017 report will be published before the end of this year, together with two other reports, one on the evaluation of recovery assistance between member states, and one about exchange of information in the field of direct taxation. But the Commission is not only assessing member states' performance, it is also providing support, and this is done via the so-called Structural Reform Support Service, SRSS, which provides, facilitates, and coordinates technical assistance to member states in different policy areas, such as revenue administration. Its financing instrument, the Structural Reform Support Program, is available to all EU member states upon request without any requirement for co-financing. The important thing is that the projects have to be in line with the EU policy priorities, and in this regard, the ones to enhance tax administration's capacity to collect tax. Improving the effectiveness and efficiency of the work of revenue authorities should start from an open, structured, and strategic dialogue between the Commission and tax authorities. And we can best tackle the mutual challenges of tax administrations by EU sound and effective solutions while working together and more closely. And this is the reason why in the communication adopted by the Commission on 4th of October on the VAT modernization of the legal framework, the European Commission mentioned that we will launch a strategic dialogue next year between tax administrations and the Commission. Again, as mentioned by Mr. Gegorov, digitalization provides new means to ensure tax compliance and to facilitate enforcement. New technologies, such as blockchain, can be also a tool to implement the objective of an efficient tax administration. Enhancing tax compliance in e-commerce is a major challenge, and in addition to the proposal which is now being negotiated in the Council, the Commission is already looking at possible additional tools for tax administrations in order to fight against fraud or tax avoidance in this field. In addition, it is really important to fight against tax abuse, and this fight doesn't rely only on enforcement, it also relies on facilitating and promoting voluntary tax compliance. And this includes exploiting better cooperation with businesses, communication, and educational measures to promote a culture of transparency and tax compliance. To conclude, collecting and safeguarding tax revenues is the main task of tax administrations. We are convinced that the challenges that the tax administrations are facing can be tackled when they all join forces and work together. Close cooperation will bring benefits to all, and we, from the Commission side, we are ready to assist and to facilitate this cooperation as much as we can with the available tools. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Fabregas. And now I'm pleased to give the word to my co-chair, Mr. Philippe Tallier, Vice President of the French Senate and member of its Finance Committee. Mr. Tallier participated in the Senate Working Group on taxing the collaborative economy, which also prepared a report on the subject last year. Please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mesdames et Messieurs, mes chers collègues, je voudrais tout d'abord remercier le Président du Parlement états-unien.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the President of the Parliament and the Vice President of the Financial Committee for inviting me here, because this enables me to share with you the outcome of our work regarding the VAT collection and collaborative economy in the field of VAT. And I would like to give you information about the changing rules when it comes to the changes of the VAT regulation. There was a change which was adopted last year, and we're looking at the tax collection at the moment when the revenue is created, because in France we have a pre-filled form which allows you to declare your taxes, and 40% of the French people use the system. It's quite an efficient system, but the problem is that the tax is collected about a year later. So we decided to change this rule, so we would have the tax collection which will be immediate. It'll be withheld by the employers based on the payroll, and so as it's done in other EU countries. So we decided to deduct the tax right away when the income is generated without the time lag. So we had some difficulties with this reform because the income tax is not personalized and the calculations can be quite complicated. It depends on your family setup, takes into account other income in addition to your personal salary or revenue, and it's progressive. So, it can be quite complicated because you have to deduct also certain expenses. So the tax rate of a specific taxpayer depends on other factors which your employer doesn't know and do not need to know. Mr. Yegorov said before that it is complicated to simplify things when you have a complicated system to begin with, and we really feel it in France because the employers now have to act on behalf of the tax authority and the rules are complicated. So therefore we decided to implement this reform where we are trying to simplify the life of taxpayers, but it's quite likely it makes things harder for the companies. We have two other topics we're discussing which are related to the digital revolution. So this changes the purchase habits and also the sales activities for companies and private persons, because we can see that the services are increasing, and by year 2025 it could be over 500 billion euros in Europe alone. So there are many issues which we need to cover in this field. So how we can now separate a private person when we have a person who is sharing the car and you have a professional who is using the Airbnb system. So how do you tax the private person income which is based on shared economy? As Mr. Yegorov said, then Estonia has been a pioneer in this particular field. In France, the legal system has also been changed. The Airbnb platform is collecting tourist tax in Paris since 2015, and now it's done in more than 50 cities, as it happens in the United States or in other countries. For us, the collection of the tourism tax through Airbnb platform was a test. So it shows us this actually helps us to collect taxes. The Finance Committee of the Senate submitted amendment of the taxation regulations where we wanted to see automated income reporting on behalf of the taxpayers by the platform. So this amendment should come into force next year. So we have asked a lot of questions we have talked to a lot of stakeholders. Should we have voluntary or obligatory tax return filing? How do you identify the taxpayer? How do you identify overlap? What kind of guarantee do you need for data protection? So when we carried out this work, we realized this automated declaration cannot be successful unless you carry out another reform, which is the declared income tax reform. In France, all the private person incomes are taxable from the first euro onwards. But when you have very small additional incomes, we do not really verify, nor do we actually apply these rules. But already tomorrow, when these platforms are starting to declare these revenues in an automated way, we will know about all these little revenues. So we propose to start using a tax-free minimum, which will be 3,000 euros per year, and this helps us to separate the private persons and professionals, and from there on, all the rest of the income is taxed on equal basis. So this discussion is not yet over in France, but other countries have been already able to put into use this kind of system where the tax-free minimum was increased to 6,000 euros. So the UK, for example, in Belgium as well. So this report has been prepared. It's also available in English, and we have comparative data about the UK, about the United States, Belgium, Italy, and Estonia. Of course, it is beneficial for all of us to cooperate because we have all drawn the same conclusion. It's better to have a little bit lower rates if you have more efficient and fair tax collection. And of course, this is only the first step because automated declaration or tax return filing can be also applied across Europe. The last topic I would now like to cover is a very important challenge. And this concerns e-trade, and a great deal of the expenses in the field of VAT goes missing if you look at the Amazon, eBay, and Alibaba, because right now we know that VAT is not taxed at all. Mrs. Fabregas also said that the Commission is aware of the extent of the problem, and this is very good because 2 years ago the Senate proposed an idea to tax VAT, which is deducted from the moment of transaction. The UK has started to use a system where we have joint and several liability of platforms. So this is a kind of split payment system which presumes that the rules across the EU will be changed accordingly. And talking about the system which is used by the UK, where when we have a seller who's not paying the VAT, then the platform is responsible for the VAT payment. So all these are possibilities which are worth considering because they have an important financial impact. And now it's a good time to exchange these ideas and experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dallier. And now we can move on with the debate. I would like to hear your remarks, comments, experience from your country. And we will start with Mr. Pedro Saura from Spain, please.
Microphone, please, for the speaker. Microphone.
Sorry, you don't have to push any button. Don't touch the microphone. It will start automatically. Yeah, it's working now.
Gracias. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, in fact, I'm very interested in this mix of both technology on the one hand and big data, the information and what you do with it, the analysis of that information from two standpoints. First, to increase our revenues, but also on the side of the equity, of the fairness of the tax system. I'm considering the ability of measuring the capacity of paying up for each single taxpayer for the system to be fairer. For instance, for VAT. Reduced rates make the system more unfair, according to the analysts. Have you considered a general VAT rate for all consumers and all products, but automatically subsidizing those low-income consumers who are buying first need products or goods? That would be a means to make the system more fair and equitable. Co-payment or share payment, everybody has to pay its part, their part of drugs or pharmaceutical products. But if some low-income taxpayers were subsidized, then the system would be fairer. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Christos Staikouras from Greece, please.
Thank you, Chairman. An efficient tax system should be governed by certain principles, such as transparency, neutrality, simplicity, stability, functionality, balance and fairness, aiming at enhancing growth. Unfortunately, over time and cross-country, there are often obstacles in achieving these principles. In Greece, over the previous 7 years, with our partner support, substantial steps have been taken at institutional, functional, and operational level. Based on best EU practices, interventions have been introduced to fight tax evasion. Tax administration has been equipped with proper legal tools to achieve better tax compliance. New codes have been introduced for depicting tax transactions, for income tax, and for the tax process to limit accounting complexity. New technologies and risk management were incorporated in tax administration, while the use of electronic transactions widened. Know-how was created to find and analyze data for bank accounts. The regulatory framework for combating tobacco and fuel smuggling has been strengthened. And finally, the independence of the Public Revenue Authority has silted. However, many more should be done to improve the effectiveness of tax collection. Reduce direct and indirect tax rates. European Commission reports indicate that the VAT gap reached its lowest level in Greece in 2014, when specific tax rates were reduced. Enhance international joint cooperation, exchange information, solve data intelligence, apply common taxation rules, and align tax policy at European level. For example, taxing labor heavily, as is the case in Greece, boosts brain drain. Intensify tax audits, train tax auditors with real-time data, adapt technological changes, and invest in digital economy like Estonia. And finally, improve tax compliance and enforcement in the field of shared economy, a rapidly expanding economy and industry which consists an emerging tax risk, especially in member states like Greece, which relies heavily on sectors like tourism. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Mr. Emmanuel Malia from Malta.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. The debate on fair taxation at the European level has been gaining momentum for a number of years. However, the Commission's legislative proposals on taxation issues must remain within the limits of the treaty and ensure the objectives cannot be attainable at the national level. Many of the proposals pushing for more consolidation that have been referred to in the debate earlier on, such as the CCCTB, to mention one example, would not only impact badly the fiscal revenues of smaller member states, but would also weaken the principle of fiscal sovereignty. I take advantage of this interparliamentary conference here today, which has brought together decision makers from the national parliaments of EU member states, to voice my sincere concerns. I would like to ask the Commission, how does it intend to create a balance between increasing efficiency in tax administration on the one hand, and respecting fully the principle of fiscal sovereignty on the other? Also, how does it intend to offset the negative impact that some of its proposals would have on the economies of smaller member states if they had to enter into force? This is hugely politically sensitive debate, and I honestly believe that the different characteristics of all member states must be taken into account. Malta agrees with fair taxation and enhanced transparency. However, I reiterate that fiscal sovereignty must be safeguarded because it falls under the member states' national competence. If the European Commission proposals are to yield positive results, it must uphold the principle of subsidiarity and fiscal sovereignty and reflect this through an adequate degree of flexibility at the level of the member state. The Commission must try to recur to less intrusive measures that lead to the achievement of the objectives identified in its proposals without interfering with the principles of subsidiarity and proportionality. This would ultimately increase member states' trust in the Commission and facilitate outcomes in negotiations between member states. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And now Mr. Duarte Pacheco from Portugal, please.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, we have in our country an efficient tax administration after 10 years of investment that also merged institutions, departments, and create an e-system as well. Of course, we have a lot of things to do. It's always possible to improve. For instance, we have an e-receipt that gives information to the tax administration and also incentives to the taxpayers with a reduction of the taxation. But we need, and we also have a report about fiscal fraud that is presented to the Parliament every year by the Minister of Finance, and we will debate this in our budget committee. But people need to feel that the system is fair. And for this, we need more harmonization at the European Union. For instance, the big companies left Lisbon and put their headquarters at Netherlands because the fiscal system there is better for them. And also, we have offshores inside the European Union. And a lot of people, small companies, small entrepreneurs, and families think that just them are paying taxation because a lot of the big ones are left in the country. So we need to discuss all of this inside the European Union if you wish to have a fair system as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Mr. Aivar Sõerd from Estonian Parliament.
Thank you, Chair, very much. If we talk about modern tax system and modern tax administration, we mean the system or environment where taxpayers' controls and taxpayers' services are at the right balance. Countries have made success in the field of electronic filing and pre-filled declarations. For example, Estonian representative talk about our experience. In Estonia, we have electronic filing system and pre-filled declarations already created 17 years ago. But if we talk about pre-filled declarations, we mean direct taxation, we mean income tax declarations. But we should make progress in this regard also regards of VAT declarations. Estonian representative talk about our progress in the field of VAT transactions controls. Of course, it's a very important step to fight against fraud and controls and but we should also think about modernizing VAT declaration systems, and therefore I raise the question: how far are the preparation for pre-filled VAT declarations? I know that OECD can support member states in this field, create some programs. Therefore, if we talk about pre-filled declarations, we have made big progress in this field regarding direct taxation and income taxation, but maybe it's time to modernize VAT system and create VAT pre-filled declarations, as the system is running in the field of income taxation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Colleagues, please hold your remarks within 2 minutes, because I would like to give the floor back to the panelists for answers and remarks as well. But we will continue now with Mr. Dimitrios Mardas from Greece, please.
Dear Chairman, regarding tax efficiency and surveillance mechanism, we have to revise the basic concept which passes through the VAT information exchange system, the well-known VIS document. According to the old-fashioned existing approach, all market players provide information in an electronic way about invoices, pro forma invoices, once every month. The recipient of this information is the Commission of the EC. If this information is provided daily, then tax evasion, smuggling, and all the well-known tax diseases will be drastically reduced. This means that, following this idea, nobody will be able to hide or to make disappear information about invoices and all related documents. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now Mr. Igor Pimenov from Latvia, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to ask 2 particular questions to Mr. Igorov. Estonia is a unique country where the corporate income is not taxed unless it is paid out in dividends. It lets entrepreneurs accumulate funds for further investments. How does the tax administration manage the risk of withdrawing of the untaxed income for abroad and thus losing taxes? And the second question is as follows. In many countries, and in my country, Latvia, indeed, the employees do not pay their personal income tax themselves, but instead of them, their employers are obliged to deduct the salaries and pass the PIT to the budget. Obviously, this procedure can be implemented by means of modern information technologies if all necessary data is timely provided to the database of the tax administration. So they say that something of this kind has been already established in Estonia. Is it true? Thank you.
Thank you. And now Mr. Ralf Brinkhaus from Germany, please.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for last night. Last night was a very beautiful night, very well organized. Thank you for that. And also thank you for today's topic. We've never done it like this, but I believe that taxes constitute a very important topic for the European Union and the Eurozone. We're talking about efficiency, so thank you very much for what Estonia has been pointing out. We have to catch up here in Germany, and we're willing to learn because I believe that a lot can be improved. The second aspect, which was also touched upon by the European Commission is the issue of fairness. Yesterday we talked a lot about solidarity between individual member states. It's always difficult to talk about solidarity with countries that on the one hand want to get funds from the European Union, but on the other hand are unable to collect taxes from their own citizens, either because the shadow economy is very high or the tax debt is very high. So we can only say European funds can only be made available for those countries that are able to collect the taxes from their own citizens. And secondly, tax dumping, which was also mentioned by one of the previous speakers. It's not acceptable that aggressive tax dumping is a policy pursued by some countries within the European Union, so we, the national parliaments, should very actively counteract that. What are the solutions here? There are two solutions. I first believe that we need a common corporate taxation law in Europe. You can still be sovereign by working with the different tax rates, but we need a common corporate tax rate to establish a tax base in a fair way so that we have a real comparability between the individual member states. And secondly, we are seeing a lot of problems in the field of VAT. There is a lot of fraud in that field. There are missing trader intra-community frauds here. So why do we have the reverse charge model within the European Union? That's a question directed at Ms. Fabregas. We always hear that the reverse charge model for VAT is being blocked by the Commission. Maybe this is wrong information, but I'd be happy if today we could send out a signal that the reverse charge model could be introduced. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Ms. Provence Perez from European Parliament, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je veux joindre ma voix au précédent orateur en félicitant la
Thank you.
présidence
I
estonienne
would
pour
like to
avoir
agree with the previous speaker. I would like to thank the Estonian presidency
à la suite du Brexit, y compris avec humour,
for carrying out their duties a little bit prematurely because of Brexit.
nous préoccupe à plus.
As regards our topic of the day, we are concerned for several reasons. I would like to thank the speakers. They have emphasized the issues of digitalization and data processing matters in regard to tax collection. But we see the danger in the fact that the development of the new technologies benefits also those who work against efficient tax collection. It helps to optimize taxes. So we are talking about a kind of a race here between tax optimizers and tax authorities. Another aspect is that automatic data is very important when we want to make tax collection more efficient, and the digital world benefits us in that. But we must ask ourselves, are tax authorities able to process the data they receive? Can they accept data submitted by countries? And does this enable the companies to do what they actually promise to do? And lastly, efficient tax collection means smart tax collection. And in this, the support of national parliaments regarding the proposals discussed here on company taxation is very important. I would also like to say that we need to make sure that budgetary restrictions are not applicable to tax authorities. Tax authorities need to be able to cooperate, and this is very important when we talk about tax collection. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Mr. Antonio Misiani from Italy.
Thank you, Chairman. In Italy, over the last 5 years, we have put in place a number of actions to combat against tax evasion and tax elusions. We introduced split payments in the whole public sector, reverse charge in some sectors of the private economy, and we have automated and digitized several procedures including we are introducing electronic invoicing. We have merged tax administrations, and we have adopted 2 measures of voluntary disclosures for capitals abroad, and we have put in place a number of international agreements against tax evasion and delusion and tax evasion and avoidance. And in a country where tax evasion and tax avoidance are high, we have seen clearly a reduction of the tax gap, especially in the VAT sector, and the fight against tax evasion in 2016 was 50% more successful than 5 years ago. In 2017, we introduced an experimental and provisional web tax on web-based corporations that are suspected to be stably operating in Italy, and we enabled these companies to make agreements to enter agreements with the tax authority, and we introduced a flat tax of 21% on short-term tourist rentals through the web, like Airbnb. But of course, a homogeneous European-wide taxation of digital economy is the main avenue, and we are very favorable to action by the European Union in order to tax corporate taxes, to tax companies, especially web-based companies, because we believe that is the main road in the future to fight successfully against tax evasion by web-based companies. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Mr. Martti Talja from Finland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, the session has been very good, and good ideas should be analyzed and multiplicated for use. Regarding this topic with view to best practices on tax administration, I would like to share with you an example of national initiative we are discussing at the moment at the Finnish Parliament. This project is called National Income Register, like it has been discussed here in also concerning Estonia. The new idea is to collect comprehensive wage, pension and benefit data at the national level in one digital register. The first phase of register should be operating already in about 1 year, and the new legislation is discussed in good cooperation with all parties. This would significantly reduce administrative burden and at the same time help to combat the grey economy. This becomes even more essential in the future if traditional work contracts will increasingly change into more flexible and project-based work. Later on, the register can also be linked to the so-called basic income project that is currently at the pilot phase in our country. All in all, this is the practical example of a national reform that is linked both to digitalization and challenges that we are facing in the future concept of work and rapidly changing labor market. And at least I would like to stand beside Mr. Yegorov's idea of concerning black blockchains in administering what and exercise taxes. The idea is good, and we must think this concept at EU level and also include example transfer pricing in same kind of blockchains. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Mr. Marios Mavridis from Cyprus, please. Sorry, don't touch it. It should work. Oh yeah, now it's working.
Okay, thank you. It is clear that the use of technology improves the efficiency of tax systems, enhancing tax collections, increasing the tax base and improving the fairness among taxpayers, individuals and businesses. I strongly believe that the best way to increase the efficiency of tax systems is to have lower taxes and less taxes in general. tax rates and less taxes in general. However, this is not the topic of today's meeting. I would like to ask Mr. Dmitry Jegorov whether there are any tax efficiency and tax compliance indicators in Europe and elsewhere which are comparable between them so that we can see which countries are doing a better work than others. It will be interesting to find out whether tax efficiency and tax compliance are related to other variables not discussed here, such as the size of the tax burden, government regulation, etc. Reducing tax evasion and tax avoidance are two of the major goals of a government. Now we see that tax efficiency is as important as the other two. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Mr. Eric Wirth from France, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Nous collectons globalement
Thank you very much.
un certain nombre de pays assez correctement.
Well, I could say that in general terms, in many countries, the tax collection is something which functions quite well. But the fact of how complicated the system can be has a big impact. Many speakers mentioned it as well, because first thing is that we need to set certain terms in place first, because I do not think the definitions have been clear enough, and we have experienced it, because in order to collect taxes better, we need to define them better, and this is true for taxation, and this concerns everybody. For example, if we talk about transfer pricing, or the same is true for the intellectual property or permanent establishment, and we need to know what kind of expenses can be deducted. We need to have an improved cooperation between our tax authorities. Automated data exchange is important, but there are other ways of cooperation as well. What is important is that we'll be able to continue our cooperation better. We need to harmonize our control functions and certain taxes where we can see extensive amount of fraud, such as the VAT. This is something which has been mentioned quite a few times. But we discussed it yesterday. We talked about the corporate income tax, and the German colleague said that we need to go further and we need to move quicker for the harmonization of tax base. We need to be able to support all these initiatives in this field, and these are the initiatives which go further than the EU initiatives. We do not have to stay within the confines of the EU. We need to think of about the BEPS system as well, BEPS. So one thing which is important is legitimate fiscal competition and fiscal competition which is based on dumping. These are the two different things. We need to look at the calculation of taxes and how they're being collected when the member states talk to each other. We do not need to misuse the terms, especially when it comes to fiscal sovereignty.
Thank you. And the last intervention comes from Mr. Kai-Jan Kreiner, Austria.
Yes, I always understood that subsidiarity doesn't mean that the national level does everything or things that it likes best, but that the layer of administration being national, being European, being regional, or the municipality level that is best fit for the task and has the best results for all is the level that should do the work. And just as we, I think, rightfully concluded that European banks or banks of a certain size and that are working in 3, 7, or 10 European countries should not be supervised on a national level, but should be supervised on a European level, I think we should also rightfully conclude that companies of a certain size and or that are operating in 3, 7, or 15 countries in the European Union should not be taxed on a national level, but on a European level, because it is the right level that is probably the most efficient, and it would not end, but at least limit the damaging effects of the tax competition that is harming all our countries and is harming us within the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you for this really interesting and constructive debate and remarks. Now we will move on with the answers. We have around 12, 15 minutes, and we'll start with Dmitry. I heard plenty of questions that were asked from you, so please start.
Thank you, Remo, and thank you everyone for these wonderful comments and questions. I'll be able to tackle all of them were directed at me and some more probably as well. In terms of the question raised by Spain in terms of VAT rates, I think this is a very interesting debate that has to happen on the European level as well as the national level, and the question of what is fair and what is less fair in terms of single rate for everything, and then the subsidies. This is a very interesting question, but it remains absolutely a political question. Many member states actually mentioned CCCTB, or actually talked about CCCTB without mentioning it. I think it's a very interesting debate that's ahead of us, and Estonia has taken up the assignment of finishing the first reading of the new proposal from the Commission. We know that it's progressing slowly, but it's still progressing. And so the question there is that some countries have very complex corporate income tax systems, that they have historically huge legacy, and other countries have very simple systems. So when we talk about introducing CCCTB, it's only natural that those countries who see this as an opportunity to get rid of their old system, to get rid of their legacy, see this as a perfect opportunity for something more simple and more robust. But at the same time, of course, there are countries that feel that they will be losing. So I think a proper balance and a lot of talking about this system, a lot of analysis will definitely get us to the point where we're able to agree. I am a very big proponent of digital CCCTB, because this is a new regulation that's possible, but we will have to see where the member states agree, and the discussions happening at the moment are extremely intensive in the Council. In terms of the question from Estonia, and by the way, the Estonian delegate is the one who was the head of the tax administration at the time when the electronic tax returns were introduced. How far the preparations are for pre-filled VAT? Well, I think the tax administration nowadays is able to go even further. As I said, that perhaps tax returns will not be needed in the future. The tax data will come from the taxpayers themselves if they are able to trust the tax administration and give access to their systems. But as long as this is not here yet, I think pre-filling of VAT returns is an important topic that still needs to be on the table to be discussed. For the Latvian question, yes, we do fight withdrawing of corporate income through loans to abroad, and there is a specific provision that actually says with long-term loans given out to abroad, the burden of proof rests with the taxpayer. That is really a loan, not a profit that has left the country. And for the withholding system and the social security, we're actually quite similar to the Latvian system, with an exception of the regressive non-taxable minimum from next year that will be similar to Lithuania. So we're probably able to discuss that in more details afterwards, should you wish so. For the CCCTB again, and it's linked to probably structural funds, I think this is a very big question for politicians to discuss on all levels. We know this is a big question, this will remain a big question, and this will be a big question on the European level. So yes, there has been talk of this, and it is on the agenda. For the tax on web-based companies, as was commented by Italy, is a very big priority for the Estonian administration during the presidency to talk about this, and hopefully we will have council conclusions at the December ECOFIN in terms of taxing digital companies. So those of you who have followed this, you will definitely know that this is a big question being discussed at the moment. For the question from Cyprus, there is documentation, there are regular reports from OECD, Forum on Tax Administration, that are very large. I mean, they're very long and they contain very much information. So they compare different tax administrations. So if you're interested, please do look into it. And one of the biggest indicator is cost of collection. So how much does it cost for a country to collect 100 euros of tax income? And I guess I'll stop here. There were many more interesting questions for which I thank you.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Fabregas, your comments. Thank you.
Thank you also for the very interesting comments. It's very important for us also from the European Commission to be able to listen to what the members of national parliaments consider on these issues. So I will focus on the three key issues. First, on the VAT. VAT legal framework today is not up to what it should be, in the sense that we have an internal market, a single market since 1993, but the VAT system is still built on borders within member states. Therefore, we are still talking about cross-border within the internal market on VAT issues. Therefore, our proposal that was presented in October, what tries to do is to create a single VAT area. And this single VAT area is to be created not through a generalized reverse charge system, because it could create more fraud in the sense that you have only one person at the end that has to pay. If you don't know that person, can disappear. But more based on the principle of destination and on the use of the one-stop shop. Although it is true that for certified taxable persons, that it's a new concept that we have introduced in this proposal presented in October, for certified taxable persons, a reverse charge will be used. But those are persons known by the tax administrations. Therefore, there should be no fraud in this regard. There is no possibility for a carousel system in this regard. So that's our goal. Proposals are on the table. There will come more proposals in spring in order really to reshape completely the VAT system. And this goes for comments raised by other delegations in terms of rates, in terms of modernizing the VAT system. Rates, as highlighted by Dimitri, is a very political issue also, and here we have to take into consideration subsidiarity elements in terms of what can be achieved or not in the modernization of the rate system. Then, concerning CCCTB, clearly this is a key priority for the Commission. We are again an internal market, a European Union, and it is true that the treaty includes the principle of fiscal sovereignty through unanimity and subsidiarity principles, but we are in the European Union, so we need to make sure that the system is fair within the European Union. And that's the reason why CCTB is on the table, and that's the reason why the European Commission also is looking at how to bring the digital into the CCTB discussion, because this is one of our key priorities, and this is my third point. We are on the Commission working on digital tax. We issued the communication. The Council now, Estonian presidency, is working on Council conclusions. In spring next year, the European Commission will bring forward a proposal in order to bring on the table a legal text on which member states will be able to discuss and agree in order to solve a problem that does exist today. Because today, if we talk about this digital economy, the tax system today is not fair for our citizens and businesses, in the sense that some of the players are not paying their amount of taxes that should be paid within the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Tellier.
Juste un mot pour terminer. Je crois qu'il est...
Thank you very much. I have a few words because I think it's quite satisfying to see that everybody seems to be aware of all these possibilities which come with the digitalization of the economy, how we can develop this further and how we can collect taxes more efficiently. But at the same time, we know that the world changes very fast, and it's quite clear that sometimes it's difficult for us to adjust our rules. I'm convinced that this is something we can do efficiently when we cooperate. We do it across the EU, and this is something which is really very important when it comes to the collection of the VAT. This is one of the main revenues for our budget, so therefore it's important to adopt these decisions very fast.
Thank you, dear panelists and dear participants, for the comments. I think the question of fairness in terms of EU funding and collecting taxes in a member state is also a question of debate that is facing all of us in the near future. This is also one remark came, I think, from Germany. So let's think about it all together, maybe in the next events. Before we move on to the coffee break, I would like to give a word to the next presidency, Bulgaria. Bulgarian delegation has one announcement to make, please.
Is it working? Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for having us here and facilitating this very important meeting. And thank you for the program last night. It was really thrilling. Unfortunately, we have to leave to catch our plane. So I would like to remind you that Bulgaria is taking over the presidency starting January, and the next interparliamentary meeting on stability, economic cooperation, governance in the European Union will be held at the European Parliament in Brussels on February 19th and 20th. So we look forward to seeing you there, and it will be a great pleasure for us to co-chair this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we will have a coffee break and we will continue at 11 o'clock. See you. Dear colleagues, thanks for the waiting. As I understand, the Commissioner is in the building and coming towards the conference hall. But before that, it is fourth and the last session of our conference. Like the previous ones, we have 1.5 hours for it. And in this session, we will hear about and discuss the challenges for EU budget. The European Commission has presented the reflection paper on the future of EU finances. New policy areas, different crises, and withdrawal of one member state, all these burden and challenge the EU budget. Since the current multi-annual financial framework ends in 2020, a new MFF has to be negotiated. And I'm keen to hear what the future EU budget should focus on and how the EU budget should be financed, but also how to cope with the challenges, ensuring greater flexibility at the same time. And now let me introduce you our distinguished speakers. The first speaker is European Commissioner Mr. Günther Oettinger, and the second speaker is Ms. Isabel Thomas from the European Parliament. After the keynote speeches, I will give the word to my co-chair, Mart Kivine, who is a Deputy Minister of Finance in Estonia. And to remind you, dear colleagues, you can sign up for the debate already. Now, I would like to warmly welcome our first keynote speaker for this session, Mr. Günther Oettinger, the European Commissioner for the Budget and Human Resources. Prior to that, he was the European Commissioner for Digital Economy and Society. Mr. Oettinger, the floor is yours.
Verehrter Herr Vorsitzender, lieber Herr Minister,
Chairman,
Kollege Kivine, verehrte Frau
Minister Kivine,
Thomas, Damen und Herren, Abgeordnete des
Madam
Europäischen
Thomas,
Parlaments,
ladies and gentlemen, representatives of the European Parliament and the national parliaments, ladies and gentlemen. The Commission very much welcomes that today and yesterday you have been discussing essential issues of our financial monetary strategy, and by doing that are making an important contribution for the important steps that we will be taking. With the white paper, the Commission has presented deliberations on the future of Europe. The budget is not an end in itself. There's income and expenditure in order to finance goals, projects. So the question is, what do we want to do with Europe in the next decade? That's what we should be focusing on. With the budget of 2018, we are moving into the last stages of the negotiations, and we're preparing the budgetary framework for the next decade, a binding multi-annual financial framework which will set the foundation for the budget of the next decade. We have identified two gaps, two problems. On the one hand, an income gap. Depending on the transition period, when Great Britain will have left the European Union, and due to the fact that the United Kingdom is a net payer, we will be seeing 12 to 15 billion euros of income less. And as there are new tasks that are better and more efficiently dealt with at the European level, we are also seeing expenditure problems. This includes border control, border protection. This includes migration and dealing with the refugee situation in general. This includes the Turkey-EU agreement in order to finance human dignity where refugees are insufficiently housed at the moment. This includes the issue of internal and external security, defense research, and the defense industry. Now, this second gap is estimated to be around 10 billion euros, so the important question we have to ask ourselves is, how can we close these gaps, the income, i.e. revenue gap, and the expenditure gap? Now, my plan is to very strictly focus on proving the added value with the European budget. No euro, no cent should be financed and invested at the European level without really providing an added value. Investments and expenditure at the national or local level have to be efficient as well. So, on the other hand, I want to ask the parliamentarians from national parliaments that when we are able to prove an added value, that they give us the funds in order to activate this added value for the benefit of the European taxpayer, so that we can efficiently invest at the European level. I want to invite you to discuss this interesting question of what does an added value actually mean? When do we identify added values? Let me give you some examples. First example, defense research. When it comes to defense research, we are still acting on individual basis, but we do not need to develop 10 defense AUVs. So a common defense budget leads to an added value. or defense industry. In Europe, we have 180 different types of weapons. Our American friends have 28. For each dollar, the United States gets 1.6 times the service from the arms industry, whereas we only get €1 back. So it would make sense to have standardizations, co-financing when talking about the defense industry. If we want to take the 2% goal of NATO seriously, some countries are at 1.4%, some countries are at 1.2%, but if we want to take the 2% goal seriously, we have to get from 210 billion to 310 billion, so 100 billion more. But 60 billion would be sufficient if part of the investments were coordinated at the European level, if there were more standardization, and if there were co-financing from the European budget. That would be an added value. In the past, the member states frequently told us there is no added value. But let me ask you, are national parliamentarians willing to give us the money whenever we can prove an added value? Second example. If we have Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and maybe Finland and Poland as well, and if we simultaneously expand the railway system, and by doing that integrate the entire region, and if we co-finance that based on the Connecting Europe facility, then this translates into a clear added value for the region as compared to a merely national funding. That would be a railway. Similar thing would be a railway connection from the Danube along the Black Sea. So cross-border infrastructure. And third example, when talking about high-performance computing, which is my former area of expertise, digital technologies. Of the 10 most high-performing big computers in the world, we only have one in the European Union. We are lagging behind. But what we don't need is 27 supercomputers. What we need are 2 to 3 for the European industry that does research and for the research institutes at our institutes of higher education. That's why we have a high-performance computing program at the European level and the co-funding for 2 or 3 supercomputers for the entire European industry. And now let me give you a counter-example. If we build a regional train from Sofia to the rural areas in Bulgaria, only in Bulgaria, does that mean there's an added value? Well, budget experts say, no, that's something that the national budget is responsible for. I can tell you there is an added value because the national budget will not be able to cope with it. It is an added value if we succeed in increasing the GDP per capita of our European citizens. If you look at the value creation per capita in Europe, the European average is 30,000 euros per capita. The peak in Europe, which is Luxembourg, 90,000 euros per capita. My home country, or that of Ms. Thomas, 40 to 45,000 euros per capita. Bulgaria, 6,500 per capita. And that's where we also found Estonia, which is today at 20,000 euros per capita. So we can prove that without cohesion fund money, Estonia wouldn't be where it is today, but we need to pursue this path further. The distance from 6,500 to 90,000 shall not remain this big. Otherwise, it will destroy Europe. The European Union is a union of solidarity. And by that, I don't mean that Luxembourg needs to be reduced from 9,000 to 6,500, but rather Bulgaria needs to increase from 6,500 to 20,000, 30,000. We need to try to cover the distance. And the question is, are the net payers willing to accept this as an added value when we talk about structural fonds, when we talk about funding the regional train lines from Sofia to the rural areas in Bulgaria, and by doing that, make the entire region more attractive for investors, and by doing that, give Bulgaria the opportunity to catch up with the European average. At the moment, we're working on these two big gaps, and we have two different ways of doing that. The Brexit gap, which will be 15 to 20 billion euro, and my proposal is that 50% of that gap will be covered by cost savings in the budget and 50% by putting in fresh money. The second gap, the new tasks for the European Union, defense research, etc., migration, or development aid to counter refugee flows from Mali and Niger in 2025 needs to be covered on the basis of fresh money. We do not want to see further cuts in agricultural cohesion or connecting Europe programs. At the moment, we are conducting a spending review. We are very thoroughly looking at where we need to improve, where we need to simplify and modernize, where we can basically save money. It's a process that will continue until the end of the year, and our reflection paper presents a plethora of questions that will be important for the MFF of the next decade. Do we want to have co-financing in the second pillar of the agricultural sector? Do we want to have higher contributions from the member states for the cohesion funds, etc., etc.? Now, I want to propose that we do away with the rebates. The mother of all rebates was the Margaret Thatcher rebate, the biggest rebate. That will disappear. So we should think about whether our budget and the generation of income whether this cannot be simplified. And we can say if the mother of all rebates leaves Europe, then the children of all rebates might as well leave Europe. I think I also want to stress timing. I want to jointly think about what we can learn from the past. In the past, we had the proposal of the Barroso Commission, which was presented in June of 2011. This year, we would have to present another proposal prior to the end of the year. The Council and Parliament were willing to grant us a little bit more time until May of next year so that we can include the outcomes of the Brexit negotiations and that we can assess the white paper process. So next year in May we will present a framework for the budget as we did in June 2011. But when you ask the budget experts from the member states, where does this idea come from that at the end of 2017 we can present a budgetary framework that begins on January 1st, 2021? Well, nonetheless, that was based on a decision of the Council. That's what the member states wanted. Now we'll present our proposal in May of next year. But at that time, nothing happened in 2011-2012. Only in the second semester of 2013 did the deliberations begin. Prime Minister Cameron said less than 1% of European GDP. That's what he said. Some heads of government assisted him because they wanted to keep him in the European Union. Well, that was a mission impossible. And in December of 2013, we had a new financial framework. And this was definitely too late because implementing this into laws, implementing this into legislation led to a situation where no new funds were used and earmarked for new projects, and it led to a situation where in 2014 our farmers didn't receive any money because the implementation rules hadn't yet been decided. So that's why I am asking you, shouldn't we come to an to an earlier decision on the next financial framework. And we have another special problem. Last time we had one commission, the Barroso Commission, and one parliament. This time we are seeing a rupture here because in June of 2019 we have elections to the European Parliament. So when it comes to the deliberations and negotiations concerning a new multi-annual framework, we have two potential windows of opportunity. The usual window of opportunity would be the Commission presents in May of next year, and then nothing will happen for quite some time. Then there's the election campaign with the candidates, a European election, and then the Parliament needs to come together. Then we have the summer break, summer recess, and then there will be the hearings of the candidates for the next Commission. And then there will be the new Commission starting November 1st, 2019. A candidate will become president of the Commission. Candidates usually make promises during election campaigns, and some of them they have to also fulfill. Not all of them, but some of them. So that means changing our draft for a multi-annual framework. That means the deliberations will begin in February 2020, the earliest, with a new parliament, with modifications, with amendments, with at least 2/3 of the commissioners being newly appointed, and in December of 2020, these deliberations will come to an end. And as a consequence, 2021 will be a year where no money will be available for structural projects and the agricultural sector in the rural area. Another lost year. Now, learning from the past. And that's why I propose, and I'm offering the member states and their parliaments, as well as the European Parliament, the closest possible cooperation and inclusion here. So if the when the Commission presents its proposal for a budgetary framework post-2020, we would like to immediately begin with the negotiations in Parliament, in the Council, and between Parliament, Council and Commission, with the ambitious idea that under the Bulgarian and Austrian and Romanian presidency, we might discuss for 1 year in a very intense way so that in April, May 2019 we will finish and will be able to present a new financial framework prior to the election to the European Parliament. And that would be a very smart move, because by doing that we could show to the public, to the investors, to our citizens that we are able to act. The United Kingdom is leaving, and simultaneously we agree on one of the most difficult areas, namely between net payers and cohesion fund users, on a new budgetary framework for the new decade, for the next decade. Please allow me to address the net paying countries in the hall, because we are thinking about how this strong dependency of national payments can be diversified to a certain extent, because it's clear that in the national public of Sweden, Austria, Denmark, the Netherlands, Germany, France, Italy, we see that the media is only paying attention to how much money is directed at Brussels and how much money is coming back. It's the net payer position, which I can understand, but I'm telling you, and I'm going to prove this using the example of my home country. Every euro that is transferred from Berlin to Brussels to Ljubljana, to Sofia, Prague, or Bratislava, or Warsaw, and which is co-financed by the national budgets there, up to 70% go back to the ordering books of the Western European companies, mechanical engineering, materials companies, mechanical engineering tools, construction companies, trucks, engineering offices, architecture offices, etc. And this means that the internal market and the European structural funds lead to a clear increase of revenue and profit in those industries of basically Western Europe that are responsible for building the infrastructure and implementing projects in the new member states. And that is particularly why I would ask you to take off your net payer hat and put on the common good hat of Europe. I would be very much interested in a detailed exchange of views with you for the next weeks, because if your governments in your parliaments wants to pass a budgetary proposal, they always need a majority in one chamber or two chambers of your parliament. But for a European budgetary framework for 5 to 7 years, we need a majority in the European Parliament. That's doable, but we need unanimity with 27 member states, their governments and parliaments. And my request is, imagine you'd need unanimity, 27 ministers of financial affairs, 27 foreign ministers, 27 premiers, and your parliaments. Just imagine this. I am hoping that you participate. I am offering transparency on all numbers, all deliberations, and I'm asking you for flexibility. If we have a situation where nobody changes their position a little bit, we end up with no compromise. The worst case would be the British leave the European Union and the remaining member states do not succeed in achieving an agreement on the multi-annual framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oettinger. And now I'm delighted to give the floor to Ms. Isabelle Thomas, member of the Committee on Budgets of European Parliament, co-rapporteur on the reflection paper on the future of EU finances and on the next MFF. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay. I will speak in French. Monsieur le représentant du gouvernement estonien, Monsieur le vice-président de la Commission des finances du Parlement estonien,
President, Vice President of the Estonian Parliament Finance Committee, ladies and gentlemen, and Mr. Commissioner Oettinger, dear colleagues. So, first of all, I would like to thank you for having invited the Budgetary Committee to participate here, and I can express the opinion of the European Parliament regarding the challenges facing us. There was a resolution we just adopted, and I would like to discuss this. It is a very important topic when it comes to the future of the EU, because if we talk about the budget of the EU and the next multi-annual financial framework, means that we talk about the European project, and we talk about the tools the project will have and what are the objectives. Now, regarding the current situation, then 2013 was the first time in the history when the Union adopted the multi-annual financial framework, which is smaller than the one preceding it. But at the same time, we had one country extra, Croatia, acceded. Right now, the budget of the EU is about 1% of the GDP of the member states and 2% of the public expenditure. The reality which our co-citizens are not often familiar with is that this kind of ridiculous budget of the European Union, this 2%, is meant for huge tasks. This is something which enables us to maintain minimum conditions for sovereignty and allows us to simplify the movement of students, guarantee the convergence through cohesion policies. So this is meant to support our single market and is fighting against the forces trying to focus their powers in certain locations. So this is fight for our common future. That means we're looking at the harmonization of investments and living together. But this underfinancing has an impact on the EU policies as well. We need to take a new look at the budgetary issues, and this is what we covered in our new resolution of the European Parliament we adopted last week. as you just heard from the Commissioners Oettinger and Gretto. If we would like to guarantee the functioning of the budget, we need to answer two questions. First of all, what are the objectives of the EU and how we can achieve these objectives? The EU cannot have ambitious objectives with this kind of budget, which is constantly being reduced. If we have a stagnation of the budget, it leads us to fragmentation of our tools and therefore less efficiency. At the moment, I would like to remind you of the Article 311 of TFEU, because the EU has to have the means in order to achieve the objectives and implement the policies, but we are not doing it. So this is what we have to tell to the Council, and I hope we can all tell it also to Mr. Oettinger, that you are demanding the impossible. You are requesting that we do more with less. We need to find solutions for crises, attacks, migration problems, agriculture, so forth. So for two questions, what are the governments doing and what is the European Union doing? How can we foresee the budgetary capabilities and new lines for the Eurozone if we are not allowing for additional financial means? How we can say they would like to implement new priorities such as the security and defense, which are important for all of us. At the same time, we have the budget which do not allow it, because our budget does not allow us to respond to these challenges, and the current financial framework every year, ever since 2014, is just taking something away from one in order to give a little bit extra to somebody else. So how we can demand that the EU is active in all the important areas with a budget which is ever smaller? The parliamentary resolution we adopted last week discussing the budget of the EU, we would like to see 20% of increase. And if we look at all the obligations which have been laid upon us, then all these aspects cannot harm the objectives we already have. The Security and Defense Union cannot be implemented on the expense of the cohesion or the employment of the youth. So we have to take into account the responsibilities they have. The weakness of the EU budget, which we're facing right now, we know that there will be additional impact, which is due to Brexit. As the Commissioner said, we have a net payer of the EU contributing about 9 to 12 billion per year, which we now will have less. So we need to compensate the exit of the UK. So in order to see the glass as half full, we need to review our revenues. As the Commissioner says, we are seeing also the end of the British rebate, which gives us all a possibility to discuss the other rebates which exist. So the end of the rebates gives us greater transparency and balance. Based on this, we need to discuss the potential revenues. Our European budget is based on three sources of financing. So first of all, we have traditional revenues, the custom revenues. Then we have the VAT, 12.3%, and we have the gross national income, which is 69%. Approximately. So these figures show us that the EU revenue depends on all the member states. At the same time, we cannot forget that until the 90s, it was all based on own revenue, and the proportion was actually reversed. This system is actually based on perverse logic that every government every year has to make these choices between their own budget and the budget of the EU. Now, this is the logic which has led to this logic of the just rebate or the fair rebate, and the finances being returned to the member countries. But this same logic has caused this vicious circle or the spiral of ever-declining budgetary income. Because if we want to take this seriously, then of course, on one hand, we're looking at the reducing revenues of the member states, but more task has to mean more means in order to implement them. And if we want to end this I want my money back principle, we need to move very quickly back everything which has to do with own resources. The next multi-annual financial framework is allowing us to implement the reform, because the budget of the EU has to finance from the revenue which creates additional value on the EU level. The Mario Monti working group regarding the own resources made their own proposals. So we're talking about the financial transaction taxation. So this is somewhat unclear. So then we have the tax on carbon and the CCCTB. So this is another aspect which can be put to use. So if you look at the big gaps and the fraud related to VAT, this is another aspect which needs some good review. Now I would like to move on to the review role carried out by the European Parliament. This is something which was discussed last week during our plenary session, because we would like to turn attention to the democratic review of the budget. This is under the competency of the national parliaments. We have many mechanisms. We have the discharge procedures, the financial obligations, approvals. So there are many ways and means, but the responsibility of the review or of the control exists in all the democratic countries, and it's related to the balance of powers. I would like to draw the attention of the members of the parliament to the fact that there are many financial instruments which have moved outside, and therefore the parliament has lost its power of control. For example, it has to do with the European Investment Bank functions. But there are so many different funds. For example, the Turkey Fund. And these funds form an exception to the Article 310 of TFEU, and therefore they're excluded from the parliamentary control. So all these things which are outside the budget becomes something which is outside the democratic process, and this budgetary issue is a very sensitive one. Now, concerning the EFSI and the stability mechanism, then we need to look at the financing which comes from additional means. The role of the parliament in the decision-making process, which is carried out based on different additional lines of budget, then there are many other priorities, there are many other discussions which are being held regarding the next multi-annual financial framework. Now, if we look at the duration, then there are many possibilities. Last Tuesday, in the parliamentary resolution, the European Parliament stated that the Parliament would like to apply this duration so it would allow for long-term stability of investment, because this foreseeability and flexibility is something which is very important for the Parliament. The Parliament would like to see that the level of expenses would correspond to the priorities of the EU, and therefore it is very important that the financing which is accessible will be sufficient and they would correspond to the objectives. And for every new objective, there is a corresponding financing source. So we wouldn't have new priorities without the means of implementing them, because the EU budget has to correspond to the priorities of the EU. Budget is something which we all develop together in the Council, the governments, but it is all done in cooperation with all of you, the parliaments of the member states, because you are the ones who represent all the EU citizens, and we need to all participate in this debate, what we'd like to achieve in the EU. So we know that this total is more than the sum of its parts. So this is what is important for me. If we look at the globalization, the transnational impact of crisis, the border management, climate change, we need to face also these global storms which impact our ability to function alone. So therefore, we have created this kind of sovereignty which allows the Europeans to guide our own future. What happens sometimes and what is important for us to face is this that we cannot really close in upon ourselves because the budget does not lie. It reflects the political constructions which are current, and it talks about the politics and the choices we make. I would like to thank the Estonian presidency for me to exchange my thoughts on this very important topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Toma. Now we have around 45 minutes for the discussion, and we will start with the interventions, and then dear panelists can give their answers and comments. So we will start with Mr. Olle Felten from Sweden, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that Brexit puts, when the money from UK will not appear in the wallet anymore, the finger on the main problem for the EU. The EU budget reflects the ambition for the EU activities from the member states. At the same time, the EU administration sets its own ambition in a way, and then demand for more money to achieve their goals. This is not a way forward for the EU budget. From my point of view, the Swedish contribution to the EU budget is already far too high. So the EU must act in a way similar to the speech from Mr. Ardo Hansen yesterday, and that is to prioritize, improve effectiveness, and act for quality more than quantity. More money in the budget is not a way to achieve the goal, but it is a way to walk in the opposite direction. Another important thing is to throw the ambition to create an EU taxation capability in order to improve the own resources in the trash can. If not, I think it will cause a lot of trouble for the EU in the future. So, from my point of view, the way forward is to concentrate on the most important issues and improve quality and effectiveness. It's not to improve expenditures. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Ms. Maria del Mar Angulo from Spain.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. I'd like to put on the table one of the most important challenges that we have to face. That's the demographic challenge. It is it's a very major challenge in many regions in Europe. We have a decreasing population, and we have a scattered population, and also an aging population. It is a major challenge, and most in our country, the conference of all the regional presidents of all the regional governments have taken measures, and a committee in the Senate has been created to face up to this challenge. But I think that we need also to react from the European Union. The demographic challenges should be tackled at European level. The European agenda cannot forget the demographic challenges. We cannot put it aside. We have seen that European policies have been a very useful tool to respond to those common threats, threats and challenges that we face. We need to give a comprehensive, integrated solution. We need to act from the budgetary side as well. There are some decisions from the political level, and I know that different institutions such as the Committee of the Regions, others have been dealing with this, but the budget is a major tool here in three ways: quality and accessibility of services, that is of capital importance when facing this challenge, and then decisions on a local level, for instance, specific financing for those areas where there is a depopulation that is on the rise, and thirdly, by creating jobs, employment, and projects that are creating a high added value. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Mr. Antonio Costa Silva from Portugal.
Obrigado, Sr. Presidente. When we ask the question which is the focus of the European Union and which lines should be supported by future budgets, I do not think there can be any hesitation that has to be supported by economic growth. Europe has to be people-centered. This is a great difference between the European Union and the other countries and the regions of the world. Asking citizens, asking companies for new taxes or more tax burden is absurd. The tax burden is already too heavy and inhibition freedoms. That is why it is vital to ensure a sustainable, balanced and a balanced economic system based on very clear and rigorous rules. Of course, the European Union has to create more wealth. It is clear that the European Union has to export more, not just some country, but all of the European Union. The community budget and the future prospects must be focused on the new realities: more destructive climate changes, more complex demographic change, more complex and diversified social responses, instability in different territories, more complex labor market. Europe should remain open to the entry of the new countries. The European Union must be focused on the new challenge. It is to be able to predict the future if there can be the risk of failing quickly. Of course, we must remain focused on competitiveness, innovation and knowledge. It is clear that the European Union must remain an area of values. It's to defend them strongly. It is clear that the European must continue to seek economy, social and territorial cohesion. It is clear that the European Union must continue to, on education, create more equitable social systems. Do you believe in the new budget based on a model of economic growth with further taxes? Do you believe that the European Union is able to respond to all these challenges? Should not the new financial perspectives for 2027-2029 and this budget more flexible, capable to incorporating these changes? Thank you.
Thank you. Please keep your interventions in 2 minutes. I just saw that I have a bell here, so I will use it next time. And now Mr. Norbert Brackmann from Germany, please.
First of all, I would like to thank Commissioner Oettinger for using the key term today. I believe the key term is the term added value, and not the added value for Europe or the nation states, but the added value for Europe and the nation states together, because subsidiarity and this particular added value are two sides of the same coin. They are indivisibly linked, and they also constitute the key for the success in the eyes of our citizens, because this is the added value that we need to explain to our citizens, and we need to explain it in an European election where this question comes up again and again. Why do we have to finance the European institutions? Why do we afford ourselves these institutions? And I think this is a very important aspect. And in times where many countries see a rising nationalism, we will only be able to be convincing advocates for Europe if we can explain this added value for the nation states as well. That's the only way forward. But I'd like to ask two questions. As much as I can understand the time frame that Mr. Oettinger has presented, it shows that in the election campaign that will be held for the European election, it shows how relatively important the European Parliament is if we define in this financial framework which funds are made available for which task. And that's a question. And the second question refers to the Brexit costs. So far, the figures communicated were 10 billion. Today, we heard 12 to 15. I would like to hear more about where these new figures come from.
Thank you. And now Mr. Dimitrios Mardas from Greece, please.
Regarding the EU budget receipts, probably a Tobin-style tax on all transactions of all stock markets can solve in part the problem. Regarding expenditures, we have to reinforce expenditures in the field of immigrants, refugees issues, and we have seen that the new style unanimity of the treaty didn't operate in the appropriate way so far as the EU budget is concerned, very recently this. And we have seen that trends on national sovereignty operated against European challenges and threats. As for the security and defense policy, we of course agree to Commissioner approach, according to which we have to rationalize production and research development expenditures. This can have a positive impact on EU funds dealing with these issues. However, we have to take into consideration any kind of traditional threats dealing with external policy. And following the experience that we have, we can see that these threats are concentrated to southern Eastern Europe. And many of these threats are related to the associated countries to the EU. In this context, all these issues have to be taken into account seriously, and all these issues and the reinforcement of expenditures dealing with these two fields are fully compatible to Article 3 of the treaty, dealing with solidarity, Articles 21 and 42 of the treaty dealing with external and security policy, and Articles 78 to 80 dealing with refugees and the immigrants issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now Ms. Maria Plas from Sweden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the UK leaves EU, Sweden demands for a decreasing budget. We also ask for the EU to be more effective and to focus on questions that has to be handled across natural borders. We want the EU to reprioritize within the EU budget to the benefit of common actions, as, for example, migration, security, fight against terrorism, and research. This can be done through decreasing agricultural support and less structural funds. We also ask for more effective control of the use of EU funds. This is also more important if the EU budget is to be decreased. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Mr. Antonio Misiani from Italy.
Grazie Presidente, io condivido molto.
Thank you, Chairman. I share what the Commission wrote in its reflection paper on the budget. The status quo is not a viable option. Reforming the budget is a political issue more than an accounting issue, and it is crucial if we want to overcome the challenges experienced by the European project and if we want to relaunch the European Union after Brexit. There are areas of action where the added value of the European Union, which was mentioned by Commissioner Oettinger, is clear and is proven provable. Security, fight against terrorism, defense, climate change, migration and border control, and external border control, and investments in supranational strategic infrastructures. Now, if we act in a scattered way on these issues, we are rendering a very poor service to our citizens and to taxpayers of our own countries, because we waste resources. We'll waste resources of taxpayers, as the Commissioner said. And if we want to bring back these public policies to a European-wide framework, we have to be far-sighted in the European Union budget. Otherwise, there will be no relaunching of the European Union project, of the community project. And these decisions have to concern the size of the budget, of the European budget, which must be connected to the issue of the added value of the Union, which is provable. And if it is proved, that is the way we should go, as the Commissioner said. And flexibility is key, because we have to respond to very rapid changes in this scenario. A mix in revenues, which must be added to the mechanism of the own revenues, because otherwise we should not stop this vicious mechanism of exploiting, of manipulating the net contributors, of manipulating this idea of who is the net contributor and who is the net recipient, and also believe we should improve the connection between the European Union and national parliaments. Now, we don't have much time to take these choices, to make these choices, but unless we make these choices, any projects to relaunch the Union will be dead. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Ms. Margarida Marques from Portugal.
Merci, Président. D'abord, merci à la présidence.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank you for the very pleasant evening we spent last night, and it gave us the possibility to discuss important matters in an informal setting. I would like to thank the Commissioner Oettinger and also Isabel for their presentations, because I think we heard very well this dialogue between the Commission and the Parliament. I do understand how complicated this timetable is, because we are facing the parliamentary elections for the European Parliament. We have to prepare for the multi-annual framework, and it's a complicated situation. We know the situation is further complicated by Brexit. Although, as Isabel reminded us, we can see from the resolution also possibilities regarding the own funds and the possibilities to increase the means. Now, if you look at the financing sources, this 1%, then it is clear that this is a share which is very hard to increase. But we are facing new challenges here, and we cannot handle these new challenges if we're not increasing the budget. The issue relating to defense is a good example, because all the member states have an obligation to participate in the activities related to NATO within 1%, but this kind of individual responsibility of the EU member states cannot be included in the EU budget. This is something we need to discuss. Another point is related to added value. We need to define the added value more, because we know that the cohesion is something which is related to added value. We need to find greater convergence so we can achieve these aims. And to conclude, one thing we need to handle during the next financing period is a possibility to add all these different aspects together. We are looking at the our competitivity and also convergence. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Mr. Ivan Bartolo from Montenegro.
From Malta.
I'm really sorry.
It's okay, it's okay. Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me some time to contribute to this highly interesting debate. I would like to share with you my ideas on the reflection paper on the future of EU finances, which has initiated a hugely important debate, intricately linked to the future of our Union and what we seek to achieve through it. In this forum, I can highlight my member states' positive experience. Malta is one of many EU member states which receives more than it contributes to the EU budget, and this will remain to the cause throughout the financial period 2014-2020. In Malta, EU investments represent 2.6% of Malta's wealth. The largest share of the money that Malta receives from EU goes to the regional policy, 63% in 2013. In Malta, the funding is concentrated mainly on the fight against climate change, on transport, and on research. The positive impact derived from the investment goes well beyond the economic sphere, such as it strengthens social cohesion, thus having an overall positive impact on political stability and peace in the member state. Benefits which cannot be quantified or measured in sums. Dear colleagues, let us therefore not make short-sighted decisions. We need a strong EU budget for a stronger Europe that delivers for us all. The EU and national budgets serve different yet complementary purposes. The EU budget targets areas where EU money can generate added value and finances large-scale projects, which could not be carried out by a single member state alone. The costs from the EU citizen are minimal, approximately €1 per citizen. However, the benefits both for the individual, the MS and the EU as a whole are not to be underestimated or taken for granted. European investments are intended to benefit the EU as a whole, and the European funding in one country can benefit other EU members as well. We must show solidarity, especially during these uncertain times, when the UK's withdrawal will surely have an impact on the EU budget. If we want Europe to deliver better results for us all, each and every member state should increase its contribution. This is perhaps more difficult for some us to swallow, but in the longer term, it would yield better results for us and future generations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bartolo. Once again, I apologize for the mistake that I made before. Now, Mr. Jörgen Andersson from Sweden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do believe that I, as a representative for a net contributing country, was addressed earlier by Mr. Oettinger. And he also had a lecture in what we find, in what way we find value added through EU budget expenditures. And let me start to declare, I do recognize the value of shared prosperity as for the dynamics in the economy it creates. And that is, of course, crucial for development and prosperity for the whole European continent, as well as for each nation and region. But there is a big but. I do not believe this can be accomplished through the EU budget. From my point of view, you put too much confidence to the EU budget expenditures to compensate for lack of reforms. I do not believe it can. This is where we differ. I wish we could instead discuss and put as much effort in reforms for better working labor markets, less regulations for enterprises, less protectionism, more trade, developing the single market, and this is examples of all we actually need to do, all a part of the EU budget. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Mr. Stefan Radu Oprea from Romania.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, the EU budget is one of the most powerful political messages. Therefore, an agreement about the future priorities is very important. Mr. Commissioner, your time frame proposal is very challenging, and I hope that you felt during your discussion from last week in Romania with our representative, including the national parliamentarians, that this will be one of the important tasks of the Romanian presidency. The future budget should ensure a fair approach between the new priorities and the traditional European policies that have already contributed to economic growth and jobs creation at EU level. A strong Europe still needs significant support for the founding objectives that are included in traditional policies for the benefit of all member states. Given that, a strong and sustainable economy is primarily based on reducing economic and social disparities, it is of utmost importance to maintain cohesion and agriculture policies at the heart of the European project, and of the post-2020 MFF perspective, thus assuring for the traditional policies further funding. Cohesion policy should continue to be the main investment policy at the European level. Its architecture should be maintained given the effectiveness of the existing common management model. In the meantime, both the Member States and the Commission should continue to work together to ensure greater visibility and better communication of the results of cohesion policy as an effective tool for regaining European citizens' confidence in the European project. To be more protective with the internal market will not solve the economical migration issue, which today is named social dumping. Solution is solidarity and the reduction of inequality in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Mr. Fouad Ahidar from Belgium.
Merci. En tout cas, j'ai bien aimé l'échange qui ont...
Thank you very much. I did enjoy this exchange of opinions we heard between the Commissioner and Isabel Thomas, but I think it's also important to clarify the meaning of every word. If we talk about added value, then my question is that when I talk about it to the citizens, then it's the question is I pay for everything. I pay for the electricity and I pay for water, and if I feed myself, I pay for food. So where does the added value come from? So we need to pay for everything. So I think it's important to talk about things using correct terminology. For me, I don't have a problem with those who are wealthy. I have problems with those who are egoistic. So we think that in the EU we have these who should contribute more. We talk about 1%, but there are some who perhaps need to contribute less. During the previous discussion, we talked about the tax collection. We talked about 150 billion, which is not collected. So we have the means, and how is it possible that we know where these finances are? Because we're capable of calculating them, we can assess the value, but we have not been able to recover them. Yes, this year we could not get access to it. Why we couldn't get our hands on that money next year? So how exactly we can explain it on a national basis that we need more Europe? We see poverty, we see the unemployment. In the national parliament, we do have great difficulties because if the citizens do not believe in Europe and they don't have information about what the European funds are used for, then it's very hard to convince them in the need for more Europe. We need to inform our citizens, and one cannot be done without the other. So indeed, we can demand more finances, but we have to talk about where these means go.
Thank you. And now Ms. Kevi Kutra-Kukuma from Cyprus, please.
Thank you. The College of Commissioners last June decided to reserve a fund of 5.5 billion euro every year for the future of the common defense policy and the European Defense Fund. It is very clear that the European Union is following the difficult way without recognizing that economic and political powers are turning a blind eye on their real situations. They believe that by continuing austerity policies and the militarization of Europe will manage to stop the racist and chauvinist movement, which clearly have anti-Europe character. These xenophobic racist movements misuses the humanitarian crisis caused by neoliberal austerity policies to gain power and upgrade their role in the European society. To overcome these challenges, we need more democratic Europe and not a militarized Europe. And we should use budget to implement policies towards these directions, for example, to face the democratic challenges, the quality of life, and other issues. I wanted to ask also about the United States' decision to withdraw from the Paris Agreement on climate, and they continue to decide to go on cuts for the voluntarily contributions on various United Nations programs on humanitarian issues, like health, HIV control, children's AIDS, and other development programs. I wanted to know about our position, the European Union's position towards these programs to continue to support, and what is the real budget for these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, I have to close the list for interventions so we can leave a time for panelists. Okay, will be the last one. And now Mr. Marius Mavrides, also from Cyprus, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to stand a little bit on the economic and social impact of the EU spending and to ask the Commissioner whether there is a study to evaluate the results of the money spent on various areas, for example, research. Whether research has given us some results which are useful for the economy, useful for the society, and also whether the common agricultural policy is a better one than what the system was previously. Whether there are certain numbers which can be provided to us. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Mr. Joël Giraud from France, please.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much. And first of all, in the introduction, the Commissioner Oettinger talked about the issue of rebates. And I think it is a very important issue. And as you know, France has never had a positive attitude when it comes to the rebate. So my question is that what is the solution that the European Commission is working on in order to reduce the rebates or withdraw them? Because without three times, we have differentiated payments. We have the British rebates, of course, which will go after 2020. Then we have the flat rate rebates. And we have the exemptions in the VAT. So we know that this field is quite broad. There are many aspects here. So does the Commission have a financial or political approach to this entire topic of reduction of rebates? Now, the second question is concerning the scenarios on which the European Commission is working. So what are the minimum and maximum payments you're working on right now? And France is a net payer, and we have no rebates, and we are contributing 6 billion.
Thank you. And now Mr. Paulo Trigo Pereira from Portugal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just some ideas. We know that budgets fulfill mainly three objectives: providing public goods, redistribution, and stabilization. And this can be done at the European level, at a national level, or at a regional level. So we have identified that we have a gap, both in terms of revenues due to Brexit and in terms of new expenditure needs. So the question and the approach that we should think of is what should be done at the national level and at supranational European level. And I just have two examples, time to talk about two examples. One is defense. Probably we should start thinking in countries when they move to the 2% of their expenditures on defense. Part of the expenditure will be national expenditure, but part of the expenditure and revenues should be go upwards to the European Union, in the sense that we cannot accept that additional expenditure on defense is expenditure that is taken off for other cohesion and inclusive growth or infrastructure investment on public goods. So this idea that some expenditures should go up and revenues should go up in the scale of the, let's talk, fiscal federalism in the European Union. And in the other way, second example is agriculture policy. We fully support the idea that there should be co-financing of direct payments for agriculture, because agriculture common policy, and I finish with this idea, have a stabilization implication, but have a perverse redistributive implication. So we are giving money, as the report mentions, 80% of financial support go to 20% of farms. So this is not what we want in the European Union, so we should move into this direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now Ms. Monica Michel from France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Un des grands défis qui se pose.
Thank you. One of the greatest challenges for the EU budget is, as has been mentioned already, how to do more with less. Migration, internal and external security are new challenges facing us. Defense policy is also an important sector. People have said that budget does not equal accounting. So I would like some explanations on the funds of the European Union, the means of the European Union that could be used in order to guarantee that every single euro spent from the budget is spent on achieving our objectives. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Mr. Momodou Jallow from Sweden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me this opportunity. We ask our people to pay taxes, and we ask them to pay taxes because we want to make sure that we use that money to create some socio-economic impact. We want to make sure that we use that money to create equity, close the gaps and disparities between different groups. But then I would like to echo some of the things that my delegation members said earlier on. We understand that Brexit complicates the budgetary situation for the EU. However, as it is already mentioned, Sweden pays a significant amount into the EU budget. And naturally, it is for us very important at this point to revisit how our taxpayers' money is utilized. One of the things that, for example, I can mention is that how structural funds are allocated to member states who are systematically undermining the very principles the EU claims to stand for. Or how, as it mentioned earlier on, this taxpayers' money would be used continuously and systematically to militarize Europe. That is something that we do not intend to use our taxpayers' money for. We intend to use our taxpayers' money to create equity, to close gaps, to create growth. And that is why it's extremely important at this juncture to really have a clear look at how we use this money and how we can somehow have an effective way of prioritizing some of the most important things that we think would give an added value. We talk about added value, but the question is added value for who? Added value for who and for what purpose? Because if militarization gives added value, I don't see that, and our taxpayers' money taxpayers do not see that. So it's very important for us to ask these questions ourselves. Why do we have to pay that amount of money, and yet we do not see the things that we really have an intention of saying? That's the question that I'm asking. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Mr. Paolo Corrieri Paleotti from Italy. Sorry,
Could you hear me? Okay, thank you. Let me say first that I fully share the key suggestion stemming from both the presentation and many interventions in this session. In other words, that European money should be spent on things that deliver a clear European added value. In other terms, it means that we have turned a EU budget into a policy instrument which citizens could and will understand. And one should recall that European added value, together with subsidiarity, are the two fundamental principles upon which the European construction at its beginning was based. The reason to stay together were linked to the respect of those two basic principles, and we know that both principles in our budget in the past were mostly neglected. And a third, another violated principle, is the additionality of funds. As we know, mostly EU funds do replace national funds and not come as complement. Over 70% in the current financial framework is being used to replace national spending. So, which means that European money is financing non-European policies. So let me wish that, even taking into account the scarce resources at our disposal, the new budget in the future could open a new path where these three basic principles, value, European value added, subsidiarity and additionality, could be better recognized than in the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now Mr. Ville Vähämäki from Finland.
Mr. Chair, what should EU budget focus on? I think innovations, 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 and then some added values. What we must understand that technology is moving so fast that we must be flexible, we must adapt. If we just think about financial technologies, it is challenging our banks, and still we are thinking about banking union. I think maybe physical banks may collapse in the future. We must focus on new innovations in EU budget. And actually, I think we must look what China is doing in their 5-year programs. I think EU must be flexible. The EU must have shorter programs than 7 years. Actually, I just want to note that we haven't seen nothing yet in cases of innovations. Thank you.
Thank you for all the interventions. And now I will give the floor back to the panelists and some remarks and comments. First of all, from Mr. Oettinger, please.
Dear colleagues, if I look at the many important comments that you've made, I feel right among you. You already have achieved unanimity because you, in your position, are against the proposal that will be presented by the Commission. Some of you say the numbers are too high, the revenues are too low, and the others say the expenditure is too high or too low. With this multi-voiced unanimity, we will never achieve an agreement. First and foremost, democracy versus militarism. This is nonsense. I'm sorry, this is ridiculous. We, as Europeans, do not invest enough in our security. The Baltic countries are greatly worried that something might happen on their borders. Solidarity for Europe's democracy and freedom might require a little bit more spending for defense and not less. America first means Europe nothing. Europe now has to finally grow up. If we do not focus on protecting our external security by increasing investment in police forces, cooperation and defense, if we do not do this, we will end up we will end up asking ourselves how we will be better off 10 years from now. Militarism is the wrong word here. It's about defense, external security and independence, and that's what we would have to achieve not only within NATO, but also as non-NATO member European states. Otherwise, our children will at some point say they consumed too much in the present and did not invest enough in the future and in security. The idea of a defense union is so close. It's self-evident. If we propose 1 billion for the EU budget, which will then be supplemented by 4 from your budgets, so that we will end up with 5 billion, and we should be achieving 300 billion, i.e. 2% of our GDP would end up being 300 billion, then what we're proposing is a very small contribution. If not now, when then? Secondly, there's another concern that I also have, migration versus cohesion. If we take migration, border protection, and the refugee situation and finance that by cutting funds in the cohesion field, then we will not make any progress. Where do the refugees want to go to? They want to go to Germany, Austria, the Netherlands. They want to go to Denmark and Sweden. And why? Because the quality of life is highest there, and the asylum legislation is the most attractive there, both from a material and from a procedural point of view. Nobody stays in Estonia, Bulgaria, or Poland. Nobody. But these countries need cohesion funds, and if somebody believes that we could solve the refugee problem by cutting funds on the cohesion side, then Europe will implode. Then we will have a new division. It was quite visible with regard to the refugee quota, and it becomes even more visible when we look at the budget. So I can only advise all of us to be extremely sensitive in this respect. We have to explain what we're doing with the European budget. I'm doing that day in, day out. I get a lot of invitations. I went to Stockholm just a couple of weeks ago, but my plea is, in order to explain the European budget, Ms. Thomas and the few EU parliamentarians and the commissioner aren't enough. We need you. The European budget is our common budget, and if you do not explain in each of your speeches what the projects are that are funded by the European budget, then we'll fail. You have to speak about Europe in your constituency, in your national parliaments, within your political parties. You don't speak a lot about the European budget. We speak more about pension funds for mothers or other national issues. Europe remains on the sidelines. We need you. I need you and your colleagues in order to enter into a discussion with our citizens and voters on the European budget. The voter. Now, in precise terms, 100 euros that are generated by a European citizen through their hard work and investments, we take away 50 euros on average with all of the levies, taxes, fees, etc. That's the average in Europe. In some countries it's 45, in others it's 55. So let's say 50 euros. Of the 50 euros that we take away from a citizen, 1 euro is directed at Brussels to us ridiculous Eurocrats. So 49 euros remain in Berlin, Stockholm, Rome, Stuttgart, Vilnius, Breslau, in the communities, in the municipalities, and within the social system. So the European budget is 1/50th of the concerns and worries of the European citizens. 1/50th. I mean, we can realize better spending, but you can realize better spending as well, because you can realize 49 times more better spending than we can. We're just 1/50th of the problem. So my plea is, let's put things into the right perspective. 49 euros remain with you. 1 euro comes to us. Of $50, 25 go to Washington, D.C. And if you were to ask your citizens in Berlin or Stockholm, what do you think of the 50 euros, how much goes to the idiots in Brussels, they would probably say 8 or 10 or 12. But it's 1. Nobody knows that. It's 1 out of 50. Now, the question of how can we finance new tasks. To just make this clear, we are willing to tackle the new tasks if you want us to. And by the way, there's no task that is determined by the Commission. Everything we are doing is decided by the Council, is decided by Parliament. Your governments have to give a majority approval of the things we are doing in Brussels. We don't come up with new ideas. The idea of defense is an old idea that is brought forward by the member states. It's the defense ministers of Germany and France who asked us to develop a vision of a defense union for Europe. Or migration. Do you actually believe that we could, in 2025, prevent refugees from coming here at the national level? These people are already born. They live in Africa, Mali, Libya, Palestine, Eritrea. And if we do not speak with one European voice when it comes to migration, we will end up being surprised about what's happening. Then what we're currently seeing will be just a whiff of what will happen then. The Africans will come in tens of the numbers that they're currently coming to us. Only a common European neighborhood and migration policy will be at least halfway effective when it comes to that. then we should end cohesion. Now we're getting serious. The colleague from Malta very impressively described what cohesion policy is doing in Malta. Namely, it achieves social cohesion, it strengthens internal peace and internal cohesion between the member states, and I subscribe to that. Our host, Estonia, is an up-and-coming country, but I can tell you and show you what cohesion funds have achieved in Estonia with each and every euro that we spent here. So the added value can be proven. So we should be a union of competitiveness, but also of solidarity. Here in Estonia, it worked. In Latvia, Lithuania, it also worked. In Slovakia as well. I am not quite sure whether every cohesion project in the south of Italy was the right thing to do, but let's forget that. We have to probably improve our performance when it comes to the sustainability of projects, and that's why we introduced the idea of conditionality. We'd like to make the following proposal. Our European semester will be continued, and building on that, we build country-specific recommendations. And we have to improve in this respect. We have to link them earlier and in a better way with the national administrations. Where we work at a regional level, we have to cooperate with the regional administrations. But if that works, these recommendations could be a statutory blueprint for what the European cohesion funds can and should be earmarked for. I'm from Baden-Württemberg in Germany, and if we recognize there's not enough fiberglass broadband connections in Baden-Württemberg, we could say, okay, at least 20% of the European funds have to be earmarked towards the co-financing of 5G and fiberglass connections for a digital high-performing infrastructure in that region. So I want to make the following offer to you. Our country-specific recommendations should be coordinated more with your governments, with your parliaments, so that we can achieve a better outcome and avoid stranded investments. Demography was mentioned, health was mentioned, the depopulation of rural areas. These are all negative things. But with €1 from 50 euros, we will not be able to tackle these big issues. First and foremost, they remain within the responsibility of those who keep the 49 euros. Your task. So big expectations are sent to Brussels, but no money is sent to Brussels. That does not add up. We have 150 billion euros per year, 1% of the European GDP, 150. We spend between 50 to 55 billion on agriculture, and we can talk about whether this is the right way to do. The communication on the common agricultural policy will be presented in December. But agriculture, the production of food, of meat, wine, beer, that was the first communitized European task, which is and renationalizing this now would be the wrong way to pursue. We have an internal market in Strasbourg, in Lisbon, in Stuttgart. You can buy wine from Hungary, salami from Slovakia. So we have an open internal market, and that can only work if we jointly promote and support the rural areas and its agricultural production. And in order to do that, we need money. We will have some cuts, but I am absolutely against radical cuts here, because some member states would not participate in this anyway. So we have to achieve unanimity here. I would love to just fly home and ask you to stay in this room until you all unanimously support the next financial framework, because then I'd be on vacation, Ms. Thomas would be on vacation. It's similar to voting for a pope. We would have to ask you to stay in Estonia until Christmas and vote for a pope. A pope from Sweden to Malta. That would be interesting. I am trying to make this possible, but my plea is have some confidence in us. Give us an opportunity, because when the British leave and we do not have a financial framework, the world would be laughing about us. We'd be a laughingstock, and the project Europe would, I believe, no longer be viable for the future. And then one question focused on Brexit. What is that? Now, our calculations, at least 12 billion, sometimes up to 15 billion. It's not always that easy to come up with a definitive figure. Why? If a bridge is built together with Great Britain and a European company wins the tender, then we have a supplier from Great Britain who is held in its majority by a Spanish company, then it's very difficult to sort out the money. Or Horizon 2020, if the Max Planck Institute participates in Oxford, then part of the money goes to Oxford, part of the money goes to Germany, so very difficult to sort this out. So we can say at least 10 billion, maybe up to 15 billion net that we will be losing out on. And then the question of rebates, discounts. As a commissioner, I'd like to propose no rebates at all. I am well aware of the fact that in long nights of negotiations we'll end up with maybe 1 or 2 rebates in order to make it possible for 1 or 2 governments to give their consent in the first place. But the complexity of rebates that we currently have is way too much. There might be 3 people alive who understand how the rebates work. One is sitting in Brussels, the other is in a retired old age pension home, and the third suffers from dementia. But if the British rebate goes, all rebates should go, so that you have as little new rebates as possible. Then there was the indirect question concerning a Eurozone budget, as Mr. Macron suggested. I have certain hesitations here. As long as we have gaps in the main budget, we should not make available money for a Eurozone budget. You have to build a house, foundation, first floor, and then you can start working on the roof, but not the other way around. And 3 to 4% of a Eurozone budget is something that I believe to be unrealistic. 3 to 4%. I mean, with a 3% Eurozone budget, just France, would have to introduce 66 billion euros. I don't believe that's possible. The Eurozone budget was developed in 2011 with 16 members of the Eurozone at that time and 28 member states. Today, 19 Eurozone members and 27 member states. So a Eurozone budget would be 85% of the entire European GDP. So should we tell 8 countries, just because of 15%, that you are outside of the group, and 2 or 3 of them are thinking about joining the Eurozone anyway? So I am making the plea for a stronger primary budget and for the establishment of tools that can be helpful for Eurozone and non-Eurozone countries. But I'm not for a Eurozone on top as long as we have gaps in the current European budget. This would be another danger of driving a wedge into the European family. It is correct that cohesion is sometimes offset against reforms. So reforms need to happen, but again, there are not those countries that carry out reforms and those that don't. There are not the competitive countries and those that are unwilling to be competitive. What Portugal has achieved in the past years is outstanding. What Ireland has done is remarkable. Cyprus as well. And I can say what the Greeks had to suffer through was something that in affluent countries would have led to a revolution. So we believe that in the next months we will have to just try to achieve unanimity. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this answer. Hopefully someone has to leave, but anyway, we have Ms. Thoma, and 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Je me rends compte, en fait, en écoutant les parlementaires nationaux que nous devrions...
Thank you very much. Having listened now the representatives of national parliaments, I noticed that we need to really meet more often. It is so important that we will be able to exchange our ideas, share our ideas, our way of thinking, and we do not have many possibilities. To the Swedish delegation, I would like to say that I'm going to go to the Swedish Parliament on the 6th of December, and I believe we should definitely meet, because I would like to answer to you especially. So I agree with you, with the Swedish Parliament. I have many other things, I'm sure, but in one thing specific, definitely, that it is not possible to increase the contribution of the member states because the national budgets are already under pressure right now. But at the same time, we cannot say that we would not be able to increase the contributions of the member states, but at the same time, we don't want to increase our own financing either. This is what we're talking about in all the presentations. Everybody has their own priorities and their own objectives. So if you look at the country by country, if you look at the political group by political group, their priorities are not the same. But if we need to build things together, we need to listen to the priorities of the others, because some would say that defense is not a priority. The others would think it is. Some think that agriculture is not a priority, and some would think it's the food security is extremely important. And then the reception of the migrants, for some it's a priority, for some it is not. So there are many topics, and I'm sure this is something you have noticed as well. We have all seen that there are different ways of seeing things and different understandings, and living together means we need to share our priorities. And to summarize, I'm going to say it in the most friendly way, and I hope that we can do it together on the 6th of December in Stockholm, that when it comes to the European Union budget line by line, I can prove it to you that we cannot continue like this. We need to reduce the funding for scientific research, which is one of the most important ones, gives us best results. We have to reduce investment policies, investments to the infrastructure, Connecting Europe facility. But there are things, of course, which function well, but I'm not going to, of course, complain about anyone right now. But we have seen some ministers of certain EU countries who sign documents where the objective is to reduce the youth unemployment. But if it's something to do with Europe, then you say, no, it was just a minister's signature, but this of the labor minister, but it doesn't, but the minister of finance does not concur, and so this is not funding which we can provide. But all of this requires an exchange of ideas and thoughts, and with the condition which refers to, with this question which refers to conditionality, especially when it comes to these countries which do not follow the principles and rules of the EU, then we continue this work. We continue this in my own political group as well. But it was very good that you mentioned it. Now, at the same time, we think about the need for sanctions, but we cannot really sanction the cohesion policy, because there are some countries which are implementing the cohesion policy, but these policies are not necessarily in accordance with the opinions of the other member states. So we have to find a common ground. And I would like to conclude with my response regarding the efficiency of the budget. And this is something we often ask the European Parliament as well. We need to exchange our ideas. Everything needs to be transparent. If you look at the structural funds, for example, we have a 3% margin right now, which is not much, because 15% of the budget goes for investment. So everything is transparent, and there is no need for additional proof here, at least not for the members of the European Parliament. I can tell you that efficiency is higher especially it's only 1%. Now, if you compare this to the US federal budget, then that's 20% of the GDP. And to conclude, I do hope that we can exchange our ideas more often and have a continuous discussion on the matters which are important for us. We need more of this. We need to do it on a monthly basis rather than having this just this conference on the interparliamentary level. And perhaps we from the European Parliament, we need to travel more. Of course, we do it quite a lot, but I believe that we need to institutionalize this exchange of our thoughts and to introduce our objectives to each other. And I would like to thank the organizers once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maam. And I'm glad to give the floor to Mr. Märt Kivinem, who is a Deputy Ministry of Finance and also responsible for the European Union budget negotiations nominated by Estonian government. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mr. Commissioner and Isabel, for your passionate conclusions. I'm going to be very brief also for the reason that the member states have not actually yet started structured discussions on the next MFF. So the initiative is actually at the side of the Commission at this point, in which sense it was extremely brilliant that Mr. Commissioner gave such a lengthy and passionate talk about these issues. The actual true discussions on the issue will befall upon our dear Bulgarian, Austrian and other colleagues to follow our presidency. So I will just give you very brief, three very brief remarks from our national perspective rather. Agreeing to a very large extent to things that Mr. Commissioner was saying earlier on, I would add that going forward, looking at the structural reform parts that the EU budget should also be inducive to, we shouldn't forget the monetary anchor at the end of the convergence process, meaning the single currency, which is still a currency of the European Union. Second, what we're trying to do increasingly is tackling new challenges that go way beyond the national abilities to react with the old budget. While EU is a perfect structure to deal with cross-national risks like migration flows or climate change, but the budget is really old, so that is something that the new budget framework ideally should address to. It would involve something that is extremely difficult, is both scaling up and scaling down the current budget expenditure items. And the third thing that I sort of repeatedly run into in my current task as trying to agree on a very small task on 2018 annual budget together with Isabel and the colleagues in the Parliament is the budget rigidity. It's in a worst case, what it introduces is, in addition to rebates that the Commissioner was talking about, it also introduces an involuntary rebates, which we see this year actually 7.7 billion euros being sent back to the member states because the funds have been unused. The member states have not been able to use them, mostly in structural funds. So that rigidity and these sort of outcomes that pose an extreme legitimately risks to the claims that the EU budget should be increased. These should be somehow structurally dealt with in the next MFF framework. But with that, I'll leave it to Remo to wrap up the extremely interesting session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kivinem. Thank you for all the participants and panelists for this really passionate discussion. I think we have earned big applause. Ladies and gentlemen, during the past 2 days we've had an opportunity to discuss the future of EMU and the fiscal compact, as well as what should the governments do to make economy work better regarding the national reforms, financial assistance and investment programs. This morning we had a really good discussion about how to collect taxes in more efficiently and how to keep up with the digital economy. And we just ended a discussion about various challenges that the EU budget is facing. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the keynote speakers during last 2 days and to the delegates for constructive contributions and debates during 2 days. Colleagues, it's our pleasure to email you the links to the photos, video summary of the conference, and we will do it tomorrow, so you will receive that information. Next week, we will also send you a short summary of the conference. The photo and video materials will be made available as soon as possible on parleu2017.ee webpage and on Riigikogu Flickr account and on YouTube as well. I would like to thank you all for attending the conference and for your active participation. And also would like to thank all the other people who were involved with organizing this conference. Thank you for them as well. So. Although we went a little bit over the time schedule, I assure that the lunch is waiting for you. It's still there. Nobody has eaten it. So you can have a lunch here, and at 2 o'clock, the buses will take you to the hotels back up. Oh, thank you. And as Bulgarians promised, see you in Brussels to their presidency meeting on the next year. Thank you, and have a safe trip back up.